Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News Live. Coming up for you, Prime Minister's questions live from the House of Commons. Now, this is going to be interesting, actually. It's the first time Rishi Sunak has faced the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, since the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson decided he would step down as an MP with immediate effect over the Privileges Committee investigation into him. Now, since then, as you know, Boris Johnson has not held back on his criticism of the Prime Minister, and indeed, the Prime Minister's hit back as well on last Monday. So, could PMQs be an easy ride for the Labour leader, or will he miss an open goal yet again? We'll find out live here on GB News in just under 10 minutes. Well, joining me for Prime Minister's questions is Conservative Member of Parliament for Bracknell, James Sunderland, and later we'll be joined by the Labour member for Brent North, Barry Gardner. James, good to see you this morning.
Good morning. Very well, thank you.
So what are you expecting out of all of this? And where do your loyalties lie in terms of the whole Boris and Rishi debacle?
Well, I think Rishi's doing very well as the Prime Minister. He's had a great start. He's getting ever more impressive with the dispatch box. I'm very confident for today. And in terms of Boris Johnson, Rishi's the Prime Minister. We've got to get behind him, back him fully, and that's what I'm doing.
What do you then make of those people who, I mean, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg is one of them, who says Boris has been treated very badly, it's a witch hunt, and clearly there's an underlying feeling from some of your colleagues that he should be making a return at some point?
The thing is, we don't know what's in that report. We don't know what was in the letter that Boris was sent by the committee. So we simply don't know and can't be definitive until that letter's published. So my instinct is that clearly the Privileges Committee have got something on Boris. There's clearly evidence that's quite persuasive. I suspect that Boris has resigned before he's pushed.
What do you think of this, the House of Lords issue as well? Because obviously that came up with the Prime Minister sort of rebutting the claims that admitting, saying that he was asked by Boris Johnson to put pressure, if you like, on the Appointments Committee in the House of Lords. Boris Johnson saying it's absolute rubbish. I was just asking him to do something procedural, if you like. Who do you believe on that?
Again, it's hard to tell. Clearly, my loyalty is with the Prime Minister. He wants to clean up politics. He's been very clear since day one that honours and awards need to be legitimate. I'm not saying that, of course, Boris List is not, but what I'm saying is that he has come out this week and said that there was no pressure placed anywhere. He simply passed that list onto the Honours Committee and left it at that. And, why wouldn't we believe the Prime Minister? He's had a great start. He's clean, he's excellent, he's clever, and he wants to make a difference, and he's doing that. The
problem is, and I mean, from people watching and listening to this right now, the issue is it's not just what works in politics and how Westminster works, is it? It's about this idea of there being bad blood between the two, which clearly there is.
I mean, don't forget, it was Rishi's resignation which precipitated Boris's fall from number 10. There may well be bad blood personally, I just don't know. But Boris, he wasn't supported by the majority of his party at that point in time. On that fateful Wednesday, 50, 60 MPs did resign from the government posts. And actually the writing was on the wall. And, Rishi saw an opportunity, went for it, and we back him now fully as the Prime Minister.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, of course, I mean, Boris's resignation was one of the key moves that got rid of Theresa May. That seems to be sort of forgotten, doesn't it, in the wake of all of this?
Well, I think Rishi's the 5th Prime Minister we've had now since 2010. So, in many ways, turbulence in politics is part of the status quo. I want to see some stability now. People are craving stable, calm government. That's what they have with Rishi Sunak, and we've got to back him.
OK. I'm delighted to say Barry Gardner's joined us now. Good to see you, Barry. How are you?
I'm fine. I just hope PMQs focuses on the traffic chaos in London.
Oh, I had to drive down from Milton Keynes today. It was horrific, I know. Is this an open goal for Keir Starmer today, do you think, because of all the infighting on the Tory benches?
You know what Napoleon used to say, don't you?
No, I don't. Remind me.
Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake.
Right.
I mean, look, obviously there's a temptation to play it large. The Conservatives are tearing themselves apart. They don't need us to. What they need us to do is to set out sensible proposals for how the government should be run, the policies that people want to hear about that are going to make a difference to their lives, that are going to mean we don't see mortgage rates go through the roof. You've seen what the Chancellor said this morning about the Bank of England and the need to raise rates. I think people are really, really worried. And what they don't want is political infighting in Westminster. Leave that to the Conservatives. They're doing very well amongst themselves.
The problem is, of course, Labour's big policy, which was to grow the economy,
Absolutely.
The green agenda, all that sort of thing. That's just fallen by the wayside.
But look, you see, I have great faith in the policy of Rachel to grow the economy with the Green Prosperity Plan, and I don't see that this in any way conflicts with your fiscal rules, because if you're looking at the fiscal rules, what are they? They are to reduce debt as a proportion of GDP. Well, if you say the only way to sustainably grow the economy is through a green prosperity plan, then you can't say, well, we need to wait till the economy grows in order to begin that policy.
So why do you think she's backed off it then?
I don't know, and I do want to have a good conversation with her and the Labour team about it, because I think it's absolutely vital that people understand there's a new future awaiting us there. And, go back 250, 300 years to the Industrial Revolution, the age of coal, when fossil fuels powered that Industrial Revolution. We're at that sort of cusp again with the digital economy, with AI, with all the ways in which, quantum mechanics are taking over our lives. We need to actually step up to the mark, and the whole renewables industry, the clean, new green energy that we want is absolutely what's going to power that into the future.
How to get on my good side, Barry. Talk about science and I'm there every time. Every time. It's interesting, though, isn't it, James, because Barry's talking about the future, whereas, I mean, he's quite right, isn't he? The Tories are just trying to hold the present together.
Well, not necessarily. We were discussing net zero a minute ago.
All right.
The Conservative government has got the most ambitious net zero green agenda of any government anywhere ever. We've got to get behind that. But I'm also a pragmatist, and what we have to do is evolution, not revolution. Hydrocarbons are still required. We still can't afford to back off what white van man needs for his daily trade. And I think ultimately we can't afford to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Well, no, and all that's right. All that is absolutely fair comment. But the problem is, when it comes to the Tories, it's not what we're talking about, is it? We're talking about Rishi, primarily Boris, you know, the factions within the party. I mean, this is the fundamental problem.
I mean, I agree to a certain extent, but actually people aren't talking about Rishi and Boris. My inbox is devoid of any correspondence on it at the moment. People want to crack on, and Rishi's cracking on as the Prime Minister, doing a great job. It's a sideshow. It's relatively irrelevant. Boris has resigned. Let's move on.
Barry?
Well, easy to say, I suspect more difficult in the Conservative Party to do. But as I say, I want to focus on the positive. As you know, I've given credit to the government for the targets that it set, but the problem has always come in that they haven't followed up those very good targets with proper implementation. And it doesn't matter whether it's on home insulation, whether it's on the energy transition. We need to see not just the target, we need to see the policy implementation.
Talk about things which are easy to say. Can I ask you for a really honest opinion, right, on all this? Because
I always give you an honest opinion.
You were very honest about Rachel Reeves and the Green Prosperity Agenda. What about Keir Starmer last weekend? I was sort of laughing at it on air, really, saying, I think it was in front of the mirror, we need a general election now. You must call a general election. Why even say it? Because you know it's absolute nonsense. You know it's never going to happen like that. So why is he saying it?
Because a lot of people in this country would like it. And they need to know that we would like it too. They need to know that the Labour Party is confident, the Labour Party is there waiting to be a government, and that we want to do it as soon as possible because we want to take the public out of the misery that they're in at the moment.
So it's PR, is it? In effect?
I think it's showing the public that we get it. Nobody in Parliament thought that we were going to have a general election called by this Prime Minister immediately, although I was reliably informed that there was a discussion in Number 10 only this week about a snap October election, which would be based around the boats. But they're now talking not of that anymore. They're talking about a May election.
What have you heard on this, James?
Well, I think it's a pretty safe bet to assume that there'll be an election in 2024.
Oh, well, there you go. There's a prediction for you. Lovely. Gents, thank you. Stay with us then as we hear what the Prime Minister has to say.
For their ongoing response to the shocking incident in Nottingham yesterday. Our thoughts are with those injured and with the families of those who lost their lives. Today is also the 6th anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire. We remember the 72 people who lost their lives and remain as committed as ever to ensuring that such a tragedy can never happen again. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Lynn Brown.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the words of the Prime Minister? Our hearts are with the City of Nottingham, and we also remember those 72 killed at Grenfell and support those still fighting for justice and safe homes. According to the Office of National Statistics, in January, food prices were rising at 16.8% a year. The most recent figures show food prices rising by a whopping 19.1%, making a mockery of his pledge to halve inflation. Does he honestly think people won't notice?
Mr. Speaker, of course, I acknowledge that the cost of living is rising for families, and that's why my first priority at the beginning of the year is to halve inflation. I'm pleased to say that inflation is now falling, and in the latest set of estimates, we remain on track to do so. With regard to food prices, we're not alone in experiencing high food price inflation like many other countries in Europe. That's why the Chancellor has already spoken to the CMA, who are looking at the grocery industry, and we continue to support families with the cost of living, notably by paying half of their energy bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a fact that Labour have never left government with unemployment lower than when they came in. And figures released yesterday show that there are now 4 million more people in work than when Labour were last in power. Does the Prime Minister agree that the security of a good job will always be better than Labour's dependency culture?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right to point out Labour's poor record on jobs. And yesterday's figures showed that the UK economy is resilient, with the number of people in employment now at a record level, Mr. Speaker. By no means complacent, but the inactivity rate continues to fall and the unemployment rate remains at historically low levels. That is a Conservative government delivering for our country.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
I join with the Prime Minister in his comments about the terrible attack in Nottingham yesterday and in tribute to the work of our emergency services. The thoughts of the whole House are with the victims and the people of that great city. I also join him in remembering the 72 people who lost their lives in the Grenfell Tower fire. The victims and their families are always in our hearts, but 6 years on, the justice they're fighting for is long overdue. Mr. Speaker, all across the country, people are worried about their bills, the price of the weekly shop and the spiralling mortgage rates. So why has the Tory party spent this last week arguing over which of them gets a peerage?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my points on this are very clear. In line with a long-established convention of previous Prime Ministers having the ability to submit honours, I followed the process to the letter in convention with long-standing process. It is, by the way, Mr. Speaker, a long-standing convention that Prime Ministers on both sides of this House have followed in the same way that I did.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the truth is, for all his tough talk after the event, the Prime Minister did sign off the honours list. And that means, Mr. Speaker, that those who threw a Downing Street party the night before the late Queen sat alone at her husband's funeral will now receive awards from the King. If he's so tough, why didn't you block it?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, I and the government follow due process and convention. Prime Ministers of both parties have always upheld the convention of non-interference on political honours. My predecessors may not have agreed with Labour's choices of Tom Watson or Shami Chakrabarti, but the same precedent, Mr. Speaker, the same precedent stood then as it does now, and I'd expect a knight like him to understand that.
I think we will have more if we carry on. It'll be more outside rather than here. Keir Starmer.
Honour should be for public service, not Tory cronies. But, Mr. Speaker, isn't this the case? He was too weak to block Johnson's list. And that also means that those who spent their time helping cover up Johnson's law-breaking are rewarded by becoming lawmakers for the rest of their lives. Is his message to the British public, if you don't like it, tough?
Mr. Speaker, it's right that we use the honour system to recognise people, almost 2,000 people a year, from members of the England Lionesses team to the first Asian police officer in Greater Manchester. But he talks about putting people in the House of Lords. Perhaps he could explain why he put forward for a peerage the former MP, Labour MP Tom Watson, who spread vicious conspiracy theories that were totally and utterly untrue, damaged public discourse and inflicted misery on innocent people.
Quiet. Can I just say to the Prime Minister, you shouldn't criticise other members. Also, you're not responsible for the other parties. You are the Prime Minister that's answering the questions, not asking the questions. Keir Starmer. Order. Is somebody wanting to challenge my decision? Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, The truth is, the country is paying the price of this endless cycle of chaos and distraction. The Tory economic crash means that millions of mortgage holders will pay thousands of pounds more next year. And the blame lies squarely at the door of a government more focused on the internal wars of the Tory party than the needs of the country. Does he not think that those responsible should hang their heads in shame?
Mr. Speaker, as I said right at the beginning of the session, our number one economic priority is to reduce inflation so that we can restrain the increase in interest rates. But one thing we know that we need to do that is to reduce our borrowing and debt, Mr. Speaker. That's how we will bring interest and mortgage rates down. But last week, what did we see? Labour confusion with the Shadow Chancellor attempting to water down their plans to borrow £28 billion more a year. But she was promptly overruled by the Shadow Energy Secretary, the former leader, who said that they were 100% not abandoning their pledge. It really looks like Labour's offer never changes. It's uncontrolled borrowing and more chaos with Ed Miliband.
There's only one party. There's only one party that broke the economy. They're sitting right there. And there's a reason. There's a reason they can't fix the problems facing the country, because they never take responsibility for the damage that they've done. And it's not just Johnson. The Prime Minister's immediate predecessor is hoping to reward those who made her reign such a rip-roaring success. On her honours list are the masterminds of that kamikaze budget, the economic extremists of the Institute of Economic Affairs, those whose disastrous ideas crashed the economy and left the country to pick up the pieces. Will the Prime Minister block that honours list, or will he buckle to her as well?
Mr. Speaker, if you want disastrous economic ideas, all you have to do is Labour's economic policy on energy. I mean, it's an energy policy that seeks to ban all new British oil and gas drilling, Mr. Speaker, jeopardising 200,000 jobs and our energy security at a time of international conflict. Despots like Putin are the only people who will welcome such a policy. His predecessor once said that he wanted British jobs for British workers. His policy is British jobs for Russian workers.
Here's Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, if he spent as much time focused on the economy, the NHS and the asylum system as he does haggling with his predecessors about who gets honours, the country would be in a far better state. But once again, he's lost control, and once again, it's working people paying the price. And if he disagrees with that, why not put it to the test? End the boasting, the excuses, the Tory chaos, see if he can finally find somebody, anybody, anywhere, to vote for him, and call a general election now.
Mr. Speaker, he talked about asylum just this week. It was the Labour Party that voted against plans to tackle illegal migration. Just this week, it was the Labour Party that voted against plans to tackle disruptive protesters by their funding eco-zealots, Mr. Speaker. But we're getting on and delivering for the country. We're delivering record employment and the fastest wage growth in years, Mr. Speaker. It's clear only the Conservatives are going to deliver for the people of Britain.
Mr. Speaker, crime is down significantly and falling. Police officer numbers are at an all-time high, but the police funding formula remains elderly and out of date and penalises counties like my own of Hampshire to the tune of many millions of pounds. Previous administrations have made the commitment that a new police funding formula would be in place by the general election. Can I invite the Prime Minister to make the same commitment, please?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, recognise that the current police funding formula no longer accurately reflects demands on policing, and that is why the review is carefully considering local factors for each police force. Our priority is to deliver a robust, future-proof funding formula, but it is important that we take the time to get that right, and I know that the Home Office will continue to keep the House updated on our progress.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would just like to echo the sentiments of the Prime Minister and indeed the Leader of the Opposition in relation to the terrible incident in Nottingham, and indeed our thoughts are with all of those still reeling from the tragedy at Grenfell all these years later. Mr Speaker, during his ill-fated leadership bid late last summer, the Prime Minister warned of the perils of mortgage rate rises. Indeed, he stated, and I quote, "It's going to tip millions of people into misery, and it's going to mean we have absolutely no chance of winning the next election." Given that mortgage rates continue to rise, does he still agree with his own electoral analysis?
Mr Speaker, which is absolutely why our economic policy sets as our #1 priority to reduce inflation and thereby bring interest rates, which, by the way, Mr Speaker, have also risen in pretty much every developed economy around the world, more so in places like America and New Zealand, similar in other countries as well, like Australia. But it is important, in order to reduce inflation, that you do need to have control over borrowing, Mr Speaker, which is why we, unlike the party opposite, are disciplined with regard to the public finances. But these are the issues that we should be focused on. I saw that the SNP yesterday, Mr Speaker, had a meeting to discuss their future, but the only thing they managed to decide was that they should send Nicola Sturgeon some flowers. So can he tell us, did he sign the card?
Stephen Flynn.
Mr Speaker, respectfully, I think the Prime Minister needs to grow up. There is an elephant in this here chamber when it comes to the dire economic circumstances facing the UK, and that's Brexit. The Tory benches, they don't want to accept it, and the Labour Party, they don't want to talk about it. But whether it's food prices, energy prices, or indeed mortgage prices, households in Scotland are being shafted by Brexit. So can I ask the Prime Minister, will he apologise for the cycle of misery that Westminster has caused?
Prime Minister. Mr Speaker, while his party leader calls Nicola Sturgeon the most impressive politician in Europe, we are getting on delivering for the people of Scotland, Mr Speaker, paying half of their energy bills, making sure that pensions rise, making sure that there's direct support for those who need it with the cost of living, and crucially, ensuring that we secure over 200,000 jobs by supporting Scotland's North Sea oil and gas industry, something opposed by his party.
Cole McCartney.
Good afternoon, Speaker. Lincoln will soon benefit from £20 million worth of levelling up funding to deliver a traffic bridge over the railway to stop the city being permanently gridlocked by the Labour City Council's huge Western Growth Corridor housing development. This is truly levelling up for areas of the North in action. Will my right honourable friend affirm his commitment to my Lincoln constituents and businesses that he and his government will continue to help level up Lincoln and other areas in the north of our great country?
My honourable friend is a fantastic advocate for his constituents. I'm glad that he and Lincoln City Council were successful in their £20 million levelling up fund bid. The scheme will see 2 new bridges built across the railway line, improving access, reducing congestion. I very much look forward to seeing these plans progress, and he and I both share an ambition to make sure that we level up not just in Lincoln but across the country.
Neil Hanby.
The Leader of the Opposition recently ventured out of London, visiting my constituency, to deliver a one-nation British Labour vision of Scotland. However, he neglected to mention that he intends to continue London's plunder of Scotland's vast energy wealth, just like the Tories, continuing the economic vandalism of Brexit, just like the Tories, and deny Scotland's right to self-determination, just like the Tories. So perhaps the Prime Minister can tell me which London party leader is the greatest threat to Scottish democracy, the Tory to my right or the Tory to my left?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I apologise because I didn't hear fully the honourable gentleman's question, but I did. From what I could gather, I think he probably agrees with me that the Leader of the Opposition is not the right person to lead our country.
Theresa Villiers.
Really worried about the cost of living. Will the Prime Minister agree that it is completely wrong for Labour to be introducing new ULEZ driving
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this important issue. While we are getting on providing significant support to families with the cost of living, the Labour Mayor of London, to whom Transport has devolved, is busily putting it up, imposing the ULEZ charge against the overwhelming views of residents and businesses. It is disappointing he is not listening to the British public and the public in outer London, but what's even more, his plan to raise costs on working families is totally backed by the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Prime Minister, new data from the End Child Poverty Coalition and Loughborough University has shown that your government's austerity measures have plunged 4.2 million children into poverty, 70% of them in working households. In Liverpool, Riverside, 42% are living in poverty, up 7% since 2015. So can the Prime Minister commit to scrapping the cruel and ineffectual two-child limit to lift 250,000 children out of poverty and meet with anti-poverty organisations?
Mr Speaker, I'd just like to gently point out to the Honourable Lady that there are in fact 400,000 fewer children in absolute poverty than in 2010. And we also know, Mr Speaker, that work is the best route out of poverty for families. So with employment, as we saw yesterday, at record levels, I'm pleased that there are now over 600,000 fewer children in workless households in 2010. On the specific policy that she raises, it actually ensures fairness, Mr Speaker, by asking families on benefits to make the same financial decisions as families supporting themselves solely through work.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, earlier this week, the all-party group on coalfield communities published our report into the next steps in levelling up the former coalfield communities, which I know the Prime Minister has received a copy of his inbox. As a proud MP for Newcastle-under-Lyme, I'm delighted with the funding that we've had from government through the Future High Streets Fund and the Town Deal, but there's always more to do. So will the Prime Minister commit to reading our report, carefully considering our recommendations and working out what more we can do to level up our coalfield communities across the whole of the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr Speaker, I very much welcome the work of the APPG for coalfield communities and indeed the breadth and ambition of their policy contributions. We are committed to levelling up the UK by spreading opportunity more equally across the country, investing in and empowering places that need it the most and including coalfield communities, and I look forward to discussing and hearing from the Honourable Gentleman further.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Mr Speaker, my vulnerable constituent whose finances are held in trust was wrongly billed £4,000 by two energy companies that now no longer exist as a result of the energy market crisis. Energy is one of the most basic services and there is no Charter of Rights for consumers. We still don't have this resolved. Does the Prime Minister agree that we need such a charter?
Mr Speaker, I'll happily ensure that the appropriate minister writes the Honourable Lady with a specific response on her constituents so we can try and resolve that issue.
Gary Sambrook.
You, Mr Speaker, issued a notice against Birmingham City Council for the state of its social housing, with 23,000 homes not meeting the decent home standard, over 17,000 homes not receiving asbestos checks, over 15,000 houses not having electrical safety checks, and over 1,000 homes not having fire risk assessments. Rather refreshingly and honestly and astonishingly, a leaked Labour memo put the blame for this at the heart of the Labour group in Birmingham. And so, does the Prime Minister agree with me, Mr Speaker, but it's time that we have serious intervention in Birmingham to make sure that people can have decent homes to live in?
Mr Speaker, the failings identified in Birmingham are wholly unacceptable. The regulator for social housing has made clear that Birmingham must take immediate action to address those issues and will be monitoring the Council's progress closely. I also understand that the Secretary of State has requested a meeting with Birmingham City Council and will be holding them to account.
Fabian Hamilton.
Mr Speaker, Ilkley Homes builds thousands of modular houses every year in its factory near Leeds, many of which are completely carbon zero, meaning no bills at all for residents. But today, it is facing the prospect of collapse, putting 4,200 future homes and 1,500 current jobs at risk. Now, given that the Home Builders Federation says new housing units could drop to just 120,000 next year, does the Prime Minister now accept that his government's scrapping of housing targets was the wrong decision?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it wouldn't be right for me to comment on the circumstances of any individual company, but what I can say is I make absolutely no apology for respecting what local communities want in their local areas. Whilst the party opposite may want to ride roughshod over the views of local communities and impose top-down housing targets and carpet over the Greenbelt, that is not something that this government will do.
Robert Court. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we speak, the Royal Air Force is operating the Hercules farewell flypast over all parts of the UK. For over 107 years, my constituents of 47 Squadron have defended our country, including over 50 operating the legendary Hercules. Now, as the squadron stands down, would my right honourable friend join the whole House in paying tribute to this remarkable record of service of this amazing squadron? They're all men and women who have made their country proud.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I join my honourable friend in paying tribute to 47 Squadron. Their association with the Hercules now stretches for 45 years. And although their vital work at the heart of defence has often been unheralded, the squadron has served with professionalism and distinction throughout. I think the whole House will join me in saying that the personnel and crews can be rightly proud, and they have our full thanks.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Sarah has been let down by this government. Her elderly father, a veteran living with cancer, has developed serious heart problem. His next appointment is scheduled for November. In the cost of living crisis, my constituent paid for private care, as he cannot wait 5 months for an appointment. He has now been diagnosed with heart failure. This is the reality of Tory Britain. Elderly and sick people neglected and turned away. The Conservatives have broken the NHS and they've broken Britain. The British public deserves so much better. Only the Labour Party can deliver this. So when will the Prime Minister call a general election?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I am very sorry to hear about, I believe it was Sarah's father, and I hope he has a speedy and gets all the treatment that he needs. With regard to the NHS, Mr. Speaker, we're investing record sums in the NHS, but also with more doctors, more nurses, more diagnostic scans to identify cancers earlier, and with elective surgical hubs to get the wait lists down. We're starting to see progress, having practically eliminated those waiting 18 months, but there is more work to do, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased that the NHS is fully supporting our plan and getting on with delivering it for people.
Alert Colburn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary for the recent announcement that the Epsom and St Helier NHS Trust can proceed with plans to improve and upgrade St Helier and build a brand new hospital in Sutton. Now, the NHS Trust is really ready to go. They're further along than other trusts in that cohort. So can the Prime Minister assure me that when the Trust is ready to go, the Treasury and the Government will be ready to give the green light to them as well?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for all his campaigning and focus on this issue for his constituents. We remain committed to the new hospital scheme for the Epsom and St Helier University Hospitals Trust. It will deliver brand new state-of-the-art facilities as part of our new hospital programme. I know the department are working closely with the Trust to make sure that we can progress works as soon as possible and expect the new hospital to be delivered by 2030.
Mr. Virendra Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throughout the war in Ukraine, the largest mobile operator, Q-Star, has kept its services operating at 93% and is investing millions in Ukraine's recovery. Will the Prime Minister, therefore, use next week's Ukraine Recovery Conference to bring together governments and the businesses to invest in Ukraine's telecoms recovery and ensure the people of Ukraine are kept connected with their loved ones throughout the war?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for the very thoughtful and powerful question. He's absolutely right about the aim of next week's Ukraine Recovery Conference Summit, which we're very proud to be hosting, and indeed the theme of that summit is how to bring in private capital to help rebuild Ukraine after this devastating war, and I join him in paying tribute to all those companies who, in the face of the onslaught that they are seeing, are providing essential services for the people of Ukraine. They deserve our absolute admiration and support.
Sally Ann Hart.
Mr. Speaker, last week we acknowledged and celebrate carers, of which there are thousands across beautiful Hastings and Rye, Would the Prime Minister join me in thanking them all for their priceless value and congratulate Hastings Voluntary Action and the Isabel Blackman Centre in receiving local care for the Carers Awards for their support of unpaid carers in our communities, and the outstanding CQC-rated Radfield Home Care in Hastings, which recently won a national award?
Prime Minister.
Well, I join my honourable friend in congratulating carers in her constituency for all their awards. I'm also incredibly proud of our health and care staff across the country and recognise their extraordinary commitment. And I'd also like to pay tribute to unpaid carers and young carers for all that they are doing in Hastings and across our nation.
Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Funding to bring desperately needed inpatient mental health beds to Bedford is sitting in the bank account of our local mental health trust, not to be touched because of this government's ridiculous capital spending limits. So will the Prime Minister will meet with East London Foundation Trust, apply some common sense and find a way to release the cash to get this mental health unit built so my constituents don't have to travel miles to access services?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are investing record sums in NHS capital, and particularly I can tell the honourable member that we're putting more money into mental health services and taking more action than any previous government. At the heart of the NHS long-term plan is the largest expansion of mental health services in a generation. I'll ensure that the appropriate minister writes to him with an update on the conversations between his trust and their local capital plans.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What assessment has the Prime Minister made of the Eurozone being in recession and the UK economy experiencing growth?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as we've seen recently, it's not just the OBR, but the OECD, the Bank of England and the IMF who have all upgraded the growth forecast for the UK economy. Whilst the party opposite may want to talk it down, it's the Conservatives that are delivering.
Prime Minister, 39 women have died violently in Northern Ireland since 2017. The police are called to a domestic violence incident every 16 minutes, and ours is now one of the most dangerous regions in Europe to be a woman. Stormont has consulted on a strategy to tackle violence against women, but there are no ministers to take it forward. The outstanding Women's Aid Federation learned last month that their core funding is being taken away. In the demoralising absence of a government, will the Prime Minister work with me and others to ensure that strategy is enacted and funded so that we can tackle the cultures and behaviours that are having such devastating impacts on women in Northern Ireland?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I join with the Honourable Lady in saying that it's absolutely right that we do everything to stamp out violence against women and girls. That's why the government passed the landmark Domestic Abuse Act, set up a 24/7 victim line and quadruple funding for victim support. She's also right to highlight, though, that the people of Northern Ireland are not getting the local government that they need and deserve. And I want to see that as much as she does, and I'll continue to work hard to bring that about.
Philip Davis.
One of the socialist landmines the Prime Minister has inherited from the former member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, I'm sure the Prime Minister remembers him. He's the one who said that we should be more conservative. If only he'd had a majority of 80 and been Prime Minister, he might have been able to do something about it. But if one of the landmines he left behind was the idiotic triumph of the nanny state of banning buy one get one free and other special offers on products that the Department of Health thought was unhealthy. Now, at the best of times, that is an idiotic triumph for the nanny state, but during a cost of living crisis, it is utterly bonkers. So can I ask the Prime Minister if he will intervene, pursue a more conservative agenda, as the former member for Uxbridge would want him to do, and scrap this ridiculous policy?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend? He's long highlighted this policy, which is why, after I took office, given the concerns that he and others had raised about the impact on the cost of living, we already have, as he knows, postponed the introduction of this policy. No final decisions have been made, but I'll continue to take what he said very seriously in all our deliberations.
Stephen Doherty.
Mr. Speaker, Citizens Advice Cymru have told me of soaring numbers of people coming to them struggling with housing affordability. And last year, the monthly cost of a new mortgage rose by 61% for the average semi-detached house. And most fixed-rate mortgages coming to an end in this current 12-month period were set at interest rates below 2%. so the crisis will worsen for homeowners and renters. So what price does the Prime Minister have for my constituents suffering the consequences of Tory economic chaos? Should they cut back on food, switch off the electric and gas, or get further into Tory-fuelled expensive debt?
Well, Mr. Speaker, our number one priority is to halve inflation so we can reduce the upward pressure on interest rates. His constituents should know that what would make that task absolutely worse is his party's plans for tens of billions of pounds of unfunded borrowing, which would just exacerbate the situation. But what I would say is for those homeowners that are worried, what they can do is ask for help through the Support for Mortgage Interest Payment Scheme, which has recently been adjusted. That support is there available for them. And my honourable friend, the Chancellor, has spoken with the FCA to ensure that banks treat all those in difficulty with the fairness and compassion that they need.
Dr. Kieran Miller.
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to deliver my report into the opportunities provided by deep geothermal last week, and I'm looking forward to visiting the opening of the deep geothermal plant at the Eden project championed by the member for St Austell and Newquay next week. Will the Prime Minister join me in meeting with MPs that want to join him in having the benefits of a deep geothermal plant in their own constituencies?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his work on this report? I know it's an area that he's rightly passionate about. The government does support the development of geothermal projects in the UK, providing it can be done at an acceptable cost to consumers and in an environmentally friendly manner. I will ensure that he gets a meeting with a relevant minister to discuss his report and ideas further.
Lillian Greenwood.
Mr. Speaker, Nottingham is devastated by the senseless attacks that took place on our streets yesterday. The thoughts and prayers of the whole city are with the family and friends of those killed and with those injured. It is absolutely heartbreaking to see the pictures of University of Nottingham students, Barnaby and Grace, whose young lives, so full of potential, have been tragically cut short. As ever, we thank the emergency services who acted quickly and courageously to save lives. Will the Prime Minister ensure that his government provides the police, the universities and others in our city with everything that they need to support our constituents following these horrendous events?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, like the rest of the country, I've been moved by the heartbreaking tributes from their loved ones. This is an extraordinarily difficult time and every parent's worst nightmare. The hearts of the whole country are with the families and all those who have lost their lives. As the Honourable Lady will, I'm sure, understand, I can't comment further at this stage, given there's an ongoing situation, but the Home Secretary will be making a statement after Prime Minister's questions.
Final question, David Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my constituents in Ickenham and South Hayfield benefit enormously from the work of the police based in the nearby Uxbridge police station, which only remains open because of the campaign by the Conservative-led council to stop the Mayor of London from closing it down. Does my right honourable friend agree that as we invest in more police, those police need good local police stations to work from?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think my honourable friend put the point very well. Whether it's campaigning to keep open their local police station or indeed opposing the ULEZ charge that would put up costs for hard-working families, it's the Conservatives in Uxbridge that are delivering for their community.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
OK, so we're going to hear from the Home Secretary very shortly. In the meantime, James Sunderland, Barry Gardiner are still here. Can I ask you, Barry, Keir Starmer kicked his line of questioning off by saying, well, the Tories are doing nothing, they're not focusing on what matters to people, they're focusing on who goes in the House of Lords, and then proceeded to ask 4 questions about the House of Lords.
Yeah. Look, he then got on to talking about mortgage levels and the mortgage rate rises that are looming and the impact that would have on families. And, yeah.
But he shot himself in the foot, didn't he?
Well, I don't know that he shot himself in the foot, but I think certainly it could have been... It's right to point out that government has been paralysed over the last 10 days or so. And that was what he was doing. He was pointing out that government is spending more time...
Sorry, just to break in, here's the Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement about the horrific events in Nottingham. Nottinghamshire Police have confirmed that a 31-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder after 3 people were killed in Nottingham city centre early on Tuesday morning. The same individual is suspected of stealing a van and then running over another 3 people who are now being treated for their injuries, one of whom remains in critical condition. We know that a knife has been used in these attacks, and 2 of the victims were students at Nottingham University. The 3rd victim was the owner of the van that police suspect was stolen and used to run down those pedestrians. I know that the whole House will join me in expressing our sorrow and that our thoughts and prayers are with the victims' families, friends, and all those affected. All of us extend the hand of friendship to the people of Nottingham. I'm, of course, being kept fully informed by law enforcement on the ground and receiving regular updates. Mr. Speaker, the House will appreciate the critical importance of following due process at all times. It's completely natural to seek answers immediately when something terrible happens, but it's also vital that those answers are wholly accurate. Speculating out loud is never helpful and runs the risk of being counterproductive. The police have asked for patience while the inquiries continue, Mr. Speaker. I can tell the House that the police are working flat out to establish the full facts and provide support to everyone affected. They are currently keeping an open mind as to the motives behind these attacks, but I can confirm Nottinghamshire police are being assisted in their inquiries by counter-terror police, though this does not mean that it is currently being treated as a terrorist attack. I'm grateful to all our emergency services for being on the scene and dealing in a professional manner with a deeply distressing situation. We all owe them a huge debt of gratitude. At awful moments like this, Mr. Speaker, it is vital that we come together as a country, and I have no doubt that we will. The City of Nottingham and all its people are at the forefront of all our minds, and every resource of the state is at their disposal, and I commend the statement to the House.
We now come to the Shadow Home Secretary elect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement, for advance sight of it, and join with her and with the whole House in expressing our deep sorrow and shock at this truly awful attack. The families of those who have been killed have expressed their tributes to their lost loved ones, and so I join them in paying tribute to Barnaby Webber and Grace Kumar, two young, talented students who had hugely promising futures ahead of them. We've seen the tributes from their heartbroken families and also from the local and national sports clubs that they played for. We pay tribute to Ian Coates, a school caretaker. We've also seen the tributes from his family and the school he worked for, who said he always went the extra mile for them. And our condolences, thoughts and prayers go to their families, their loved ones, their friends and colleagues. And our thoughts and best wishes too go to the 3 other people who have been injured in this same terrible attack, and to their families who will be so deeply distressed at what has happened, worrying for their loved ones. And we stand in solidarity with the people of Nottingham and the University of Nottingham, where the 2 young people were studying, all so shocked and devastated at what has happened, but also so determined to come together in the face of tragedy. People who gathered in vigil last night, the sober words and tributes from the council leader, from local MPs, local faith and community leaders, and everyone particularly will join in thanks to the emergency services who have had to respond to this awful attack, saving lives and keeping people safe. As the Home Secretary has said, an individual has been arrested, and this is still a major ongoing investigation, and it is not appropriate for us to speculate or say anything that would interfere in that investigation. But can I welcome the involvement of counter-terror police at an early stage of this investigation that does nothing to preempt any conclusion about the potential motive behind this attack, but I have raised in the past the importance of having CT police expertise involved at an early stage while motives and circumstances are investigated, rather than being brought in at a much later stage once relevant material has been gathered. So can the Home Secretary confirm this is a sensible approach for the expertise and assistance of the counter-terror police to be drawn on at an early stage, even before any conclusion has been reached? And can she tell us if she's been given any timetable for updates on this issue? She'll know there are also wider concerns about the need for properly coordinated and appropriate sensitive support for the victims of major incidents, including terror attacks. So can she set out what support is available for the families and friends of those affected and for the services and people in Nottingham? Doubtless there will be countless more questions for the community and for Parliament once more is known about this dreadful attack. But for now, we send our support to Nottinghamshire Police in their investigation and all our thoughts and solidarity to those who have lost loved ones and to the people of Nottingham at this difficult time.
Home Secretary.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her comments and the sentiment with which she makes them. The Nottinghamshire Police are leading the investigation. It is they are at a very early stage. They have carried out a number of searches, a number of inquiries across the city, and they will continue to gather evidence over the coming days. And police and other agencies are working flat out to establish the full facts and provide support to everyone affected. As I said, and I'll reiterate, the police have asked for time and space and patience while those inquiries continue. I'm being kept regularly updated by the police and agencies on the ground. There is the families of all of the victims have been informed and are being supported by specialist police officers. As there are casualties and 3 fatalities, there is a real need for emergency care for those families, as you would imagine, and specialist support is being put on for those who are directly affected. But I echo the sentiment of the House, as expressed by the Prime Minister, that we are all saddened, shocked, and our hearts are with those affected, the victims, their families, their friends, their communities, and the City of Nottingham.
Goes to Chair of the Security Committee, Sir Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When a despicable incident of this sort occurs...
Leaving the Home Secretary and the Shadow Home Secretary there as they make their statements about the situation in Nottingham, where James Sunderland, obviously you work very closely with the Home Secretary, where obviously there's very little that actually anyone can say at this stage, apart from their commitments to the police and the investigations going forward, clearly.
Yeah, dreadful events in Nottingham. Hearts go out to all the families concerned and friends and the students at Nottingham University. But there is not much the Home Secretary can say.
No.
Because it's a live investigation, counter-terrorist police are involved. We can't make assumptions at this stage, but clearly appalling events and sadly all too frequent.
Yeah, it is absolutely tragic. We'll keep you fully up to date with that situation, of course, as we get any more developments on that. But let's see what we all made of PMQs. Do you think anyone landed a devastating blow, Barry, in any of this? I thought it was all it seemed quite timid to me this week.
Yeah, I think you're right. Obviously, the Leader of the Opposition was making his case that the Prime Minister was too weak. That was the first sort of charge that was given to actually go against protocol. And you've got to say, convention and so on is important in Parliament. But actually, if we never broke with convention, we'd never get any change at all. Sometimes it is appropriate to break with it, and it's knowing when those moments are. But so the charge, if you like, was he was too weak, he should have been tougher, and then it got on to why hasn't he addressed the mortgage rate rises that people are facing, And then, of course, he turned it on to Truss's resignation on his list. What are you going to do with that? And that actually will be a very interesting question.
I mean, he did, in some respects, I mean, whether you agree with these sort of internal arguments or not, James, he did tie the PM in a bit of a knot there with that one.
Yeah, to a certain extent, I think Rishi Sunak is caught between a rock and a hard place in many ways. He is the Prime Minister. He has to show some deference and respect to his predecessors. That's what he's doing. He hasn't interfered in the process at all, and it's gone through to the committee. So I sympathise entirely with where the Prime Minister is. But it's interesting that he has been baited today on what to do with Liz Truss's list. Yeah. He has a decision to make on that one as well.
And that was 40 billion to the economy, and yet these people are going to be rewarded?
Well, I think my point, I mean, Barry's not necessarily wrong. My point is this. I think politicians forget sometimes that their role is to serve the people they represent. It's not about me, it's about them. And actually, we were there to serve others. And I think in many ways it is quite unedifying seeing individuals in the media gobbling off about being given a peerage or not. And I think ultimately that, that is a huge accolade, a huge privilege. You don't ask for these things. These things come to you because you deserve them. And ultimately, the party has to move on from this very quickly and focus, quite rightly, which we are doing, on the priorities of the day.
OK, let's just get a quick catch-up with our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, who's in Westminster. Afternoon to you, Tom. I mean, as our two gents here say, everyone needs to focus on what really matters, but, Westminster is tied up in the debates of the last week, isn't it?
It certainly is, and it did feel like the conversation sort of took a gear change halfway through that back and forth between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. Keir Starmer came out fighting with regard to focusing on those peerages, but in the context of what a distraction that row may have been. Rishi Sunak, of course, saying he was just following convention, but Rishi Sunak had a trump card of his own in this discussion. He raised the cases of both Shami Chakrabarti and indeed Tom Watson, two controversial peerages nominated by the Labour Party but implemented by Conservative Prime Ministers through convention. He says it was right for Conservative Prime Ministers to follow convention, to not block those peerages, despite the questionable background and indeed conduct of those who were nominated by the Labour Party. It was quite interesting to see how Sir Keir Starmer changed the subject fairly quickly after he was whacked with the accusation that he put forward Tom Watson for a peerage when, as the Prime Minister claimed, Tom Watson had put lives through misery with supporting false accusations around the context of Operation U-Tree. Sir Keir Starmer quickly changed the subject after that to focus back onto perhaps more pertinent issues for the public like mortgage rates and inflation. But given that both leaders were pulling no punches, particularly in that early part of the exchange, I feel like we can squarely call that back and forth a score draw.
Yeah, I think you're probably right on that, Tom. OK, Tom, thank you. OK, let's just tell you some breaking news we're getting from our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who can reveal the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats this year has passed 9,000. That follows another 204 people intercepted by Border Force on 4 small boats yesterday. Bringing updates on that throughout the course of the afternoon, of course. Conservative MP James Sunderland, Labour MP Barry Gardner still here. Barry, you had a point you wanted to raise.
There was one question I wanted to get in, and that was when you see the members of Parliament ask the Prime Minister to congratulate Barham Primary School on the fact that it's been nominated for the award of World's Best School for Community Collaboration. £250,000 prize that they would get a share of. And, of course, the question was never asked, because I'm sitting here and doing this with you. So that's what I would have been asking at PMQs. I would have loved to have seen the Prime Minister say, Karen Giles, brilliant head teacher, what a fabulous school, and we need these schools all across the country.
Oh, well, there you go. You can't argue with that. I can't really rebut him on that one, can I? It's a fair point.
No.
I tell you what, can I get your take, James, on because we keep saying, don't we, the big issues that are affecting people, and people are concerned about immigration levels. We've just got these figures, 9,000 so far this year. The PM has promised to stop small boats, the illegal migration across the Channel. We don't seem to be making any progress on that. People are going to care when it comes to the next election.
Well, just to hark very quickly back to Tom Harwood's interview there, he scored it a score draw. I would have given PMQs today as a 0-0 because we're too busy discussing political issues. We should be discussing more substantive matters like immigration, like cost of living, and I think that's what people want to see with PMQs. But in respect of legal migration, the figures are very high. We're obviously concerned about migration, illegal migration in particular, and I think that ultimately the illegal migration bill going through the House at the moment is long overdue. And when that comes through, we should have the ability to deal appropriately with people that are here illegitimately.
How do you think Labour's going to deal with this? Because, I mean, this is going to be an election issue, Barry, isn't it, whenever that election comes?
No, of course it is. Look, we've now seen for 10 years, 13 years actually, every Conservative Party manifesto has said that it is going to reduce illegal migration into this country. Each time, when it came to the next general election, they haven't managed to, it's gone up, and they've then made the same pledge again. So I think what is obvious is that we don't just need more rhetoric, we don't just need more promises, we need a different approach to this.
But isn't that what's being proposed in the bill?
Well,
will Labour support it?
I think what's being proposed is more of the same and tougher. I think if you look at the proposals that we've put forward about the engagement with the police, not in France, not just in stopping these people from getting on the boats, but actually then processing them in France, so they don't just say, OK, I've been stopped from getting on today, but I'm going to be back in the same place tomorrow. And actually the whole business of proper, safe and legal routes, the ability to process people properly, that's what's important. I think there is a wider challenge, and I think it's one that James would acknowledge, and that is we need to look at the international framework now for the 1951 Convention. Because in 1951, people could not simply get on a plane and fly. They could not simply come across continents in the way that they can do now. The whole mode of international travel has changed. In 1951, people were talking essentially of people in a war zone moving into neighbouring countries and seeking refuge there, as millions of people are already doing, you know, from Afghanistan into Pakistan and so on. But we're in a different age. And we need to respond appropriately. And that means the Home Office should be setting up in Pakistan, in those refugee camps, the UN processing facilities to make sure that people who've got family in this country who were on Operation Pitting, you know, called to the airport, who's still not here, but they're in Pakistan, they should be processed.
Well, I mean, that sounds like joined-up thinking, James. Why doesn't it happen?
Well, it's always very easy in theory, less so in practice. I think, just to make a few observations on that, I mean, I talk to politicians across Europe all the time, and the issues with illegal migration are far greater, actually, in places like Italy, Greece, France and Belgium. You know, what's happening with the UK right now is a drop in the ocean in comparison. But the important thing for me is twofold. Firstly, the operation with the French is paying dividends. The numbers are down over last year. That's joint police working with the French, delivering that effect on the ground. And here's the big thing. We wouldn't have been able to pass this bill until we'd left the European Union. So Brexit has enabled the UK to pass sovereign legislation, which allows us then autonomously to deal with it, and that's really important.
OK. Look, gents, we've got to leave it there. James Sutherland, Barry Gardner, thank you both very much indeed. What did you make of Prime Minister's questions today? Do you agree with this idea that Westminster has got tied up in internal arguments at the moment? Are the Tories tied up in knots with Boris Johnson arguing with Rishi Sunak and all this hoo-ha over who's going to get a peerage or not and how all that system works? Do they need to be concentrating on what really matters to the people of Britain? Cost of living, all those sort of issues, and of course all the business with immigration. Do let us know, gbviews@gbnews.com. Coming up, we're going to be in Nottingham, getting the latest updates on the ground following the horrific events of yesterday morning.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Very good afternoon to you. This is GB News Live. Here's what we've got coming up for you this hour. The third victim of the Nottingham attacks has been named as Ian Coates, who worked at a local school as a caretaker. The head teacher there said he always went the extra mile for pupils and colleagues. Well, tributes have poured in for the 2 other victims. Grace Kumar's former school called her dedicated and gifted. Barnaby Webber's family said he was beautiful and brilliant. And ITV's boss has told MPs Philip Schofield's relationship with a much younger colleague was deeply inappropriate, but says there was never enough evidence to investigate rumours because both parties denied any relationship. And later in the programme, a rare moment of economic sunshine. Would you believe it? Liam Halligan's going to be here with a reason to be cheerful. Before that, here are the latest headlines with Tatiana.
Stephen, thank you very much and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. One person remains in a critical condition following yesterday's attack in Nottingham, with the Home Secretary confirming she's been kept up to date on the investigation. School caretaker Ian Coates has now been named as one of 3 people killed, his van then stolen and used to target others. Huntingdon Academy described him as beloved and respected, a site manager who's always went the extra mile. 19-year-olds Barnaby Webber and Grace Coomer were also stabbed to death. Both were said to be popular and talented sportspeople. A 31-year-old man still being questioned by police trying to establish a motive. Suella Braverman made a short statement in the Commons.
I know that the whole House will join me in expressing our sorrow and that our thoughts and prayers are with the victims' families, friends and all those affected. All of us extend the hand of friendship to the people of Nottingham.
Well, the Home Secretary has also been addressing the UK's migrant crisis today. That's as the latest figures show the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has now passed 9,000. Questioned by MPs on her plans to tackle illegal migration, Suella Braverman conceded that women who were trafficked into the UK could be deported under the new measures.
We are not including blanket exclusions in our legislation. So we have struck the right balance whereby genuine victims of modern slavery can still put in a claim, and if they are able to meet the thresholds that we've set in the bill, combined with thresholds that we are implementing at the moment in terms of objective and compelling evidence for their reasonable grounds claim, if they're part of a police investigation, we believe that will filter out the vexatious claims of modern slavery.
ITV's boss says both parties involved in the Philip Schofield affair repeatedly denied allegations of a relationship. Chief Executive Dame Carolyn McCall has told MPs action would have been taken had there been any evidence, but there was only hearsay, rumours and speculation. Philip Schofield quit this morning after admitting he had an affair with a younger colleague.
With evidence, we would have been able to launch a formal investigation. Because the imbalance of power, the imbalance of dynamics in that relationship makes it deeply inappropriate. We worked very, very hard for many, many months, in fact, until recently, to ask people, not just Philip Schofield and Person X, but people in production, if they knew something was going on. And it was repeatedly denied by both individuals.
Stronger trade at bars, pubs and shops has helped the economy return to growth. The latest figures show it expanded by 0.2% in April, recovering from a 0.3% fall the previous month. The Office for National Statistics says the positive impact of improved hospital and retail spending was offset by industrial action hitting other sectors. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has welcomed the data but admits more work still needs to be done.
Today's figures confirm what the OECD said last week, the IMF said last month. The Bank of England themselves have said that there is underlying resilience in the British economy, and of course that's positive, but we still have a big issue with inflation. That is the number one challenge we face. We have to do everything we can as a government, as a country, to support the Bank of England in their mission to squeeze inflation out of the system, and that is our primary focus.
Thousands of NHS appointments and operations are being affected by a junior doctors' strike in England. Union members have walked off the job for 72 hours over an ongoing pay dispute. The British Medical Association is asking for a full restoration of pay, which it says has seen a 26% cut. They've so far rejected a 5% offer. BMA Chair Philip Banfield says they deserve more.
The value of their pay has gone down. We've got junior doctors now qualifying and being paid just £14 an hour, and yet they have up to £100,000 worth of debt. And we're asking the government to recognise that drop in value and therefore to restore the value of their pay. And it doesn't seem unreasonable at all to ask for £19 an hour instead of £14 an hour for the expertise that they bring.
Health Secretary Steve Barclay says the offer is fair and reasonable.
I think a 35% pay rise to many of your viewers
is seen as something that's out of step with what they themselves would be receiving. So we had talks with the junior doctors. The junior doctors walked away from those discussions, even though we brought in the intermediary that they asked us to do. And we made them an offer, 5% plus a lump sum, in line with what's been offered for paramedics, for midwives, for nurses, for many others with the NHS. And today, unfortunately, the junior doctors have refused to move at all from their demand for 35%.
You're with GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Stephen.
Tatiana, thank you. Now, the third victim of the attacks in Nottingham, which left 3 dead and another 3 injured, has been named today. Ian Coates was a school caretaker in his 60s. He was fatally stabbed in Magdala Road in the early hours of yesterday morning. And also, as you'll be aware by now, 2 19-year-old university students, Grace Kumar and Barnaby Webber, have also been named as the other 2 victims killed. Both students at the University of Nottingham. In the last hour, the Home Secretary has addressed the House of Commons, confirming that counter-terror police are assisting the investigation.
I can tell the House that the police are working flat out to establish the full facts and provide support to everyone affected. They are currently keeping an open mind as to the motives behind these attacks, but I can confirm Nottinghamshire police are being assisted in their inquiries by counter-terror police, though this does not mean that it is currently being treated as a terrorist attack.
OK, well, let's go to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who's in Nottingham City Centre. Mark, what's the latest on the investigation?
Well, we're getting more of an idea about the timeline of events. Those 2 students, first of all, who were walking home in the early hours, around about 4 a.m. in the morning, when they were attacked and stabbed to death. We're now being told that the prime suspect in this case then tried to get and gain access to a homeless hostel, which is just nearby the location where the 2 students were attacked, that he tried to get into a ground floor bedroom, but he was prevented from doing that by someone who was sleeping in the ground floor bedroom of this hostel at Sealyhurst House. The manager of that hostel has indeed confirmed to the press that this suspect did try to get in to the hostel at that time in the morning. After being thwarted in his attempts to gain access to this bedroom, we understand that he then left. He managed to flag down or somehow stop this van being driven by the 3rd victim to be fatally stabbed. Ian Coates stabbed him and then stole his van and drove the van down to where I am at the moment, Milton Street, right in the centre of Nottingham, where he ran over 3 members of the public. One of those people injured yesterday still in hospital today, critically injured.
I mean, I know that as the investigation goes on, Mark, it's very difficult to know quite what is happening, and the Home Secretary's made it very clear in her statement today that actually what is not helpful is any sort of speculation around this. But one thing we do know is that the people of Nottingham, and particularly, in a way, the students of Nottingham, are going to be absolutely reeling from this.
Yes, of course. I mean, you know, this is a young, vibrant city because of those 2 famous universities that attract many thousands of people to this city to be further educated each year. And of course, these 2 young students that were making their way, we're told, from the Prism nightclub, which is frequented by many students around here, of course celebrating really the end of the student year and looking forward to what was supposed to be a graduation ball taking place last night that was cancelled by Nottingham University as a mark of respect following the deaths of two of their students. So yes, of course, people feel it very keenly indeed and want questions answered as to what exactly happened and what the motivation was. I mean, the police are at pains to point out, although they have not yet established what the motive was, it's believed that the man who is in custody, 31-year-old, who GB News understands is a West African migrant who came to the UK some 10 or so years ago and is known to the police. It's understood that that man has not been cooperating with the police while he's been in custody, so difficult then to get a full handle on what the motivation might have been. However, having raided a number of properties connected to this man yesterday, the police are convinced that this was an isolated incident, in so much as there are no other outstanding individuals out there connected to this man who might have had knowledge of what was going on or might be planning something similar themselves.
OK, Mark, for now, thank you. Well, let's talk to security and intelligence expert from the University of Buckingham, Anthony Glees. Anthony, good afternoon to you. Can you shed some light on why the anti-terrorism team are assisting in the investigation with this? Because the Home Secretary's made it very clear that we are not to jump to any conclusions.
Well, it's a very good question. And at first we were told this was not an incident in which the counter-terrorism police were going to be involved. Police asked us not to speculate, but that is, of course, completely impossible in today's environment. And as everybody knows, we've not only seen scenes of great bravery by the police arresting the suspect, but also the people of Nottingham need to have some kind of reassurance that this incident is being properly understood. And I think that's why the counter-terrorist police have been involved in this. What's going on? It is the same three things that we've been talking about ever since the awful incident took place. It could be a madman. It could be an Islamist fanatic. It could be a right-wing fanatic. And the news that this is somebody, the alleged suspect is somebody who came to this country lawfully 10 years ago from West Africa, adds a further issue that will need to be looked at. Of course, we know there are plenty of killers, homegrown British, born and bred killers, people who torture their children and murder them and so on. However, the government has got a duty to keep people as safe as is possible. And we've had a spate of lone wolf terror attacks. We've had them in the United Kingdom, particularly in 2017. I think there were 5 that year of people using vans and knives to kill and maim others. We had the attack in Annecy in France just a few days ago. And we know that if these people are mad, if they're Islamists or if they're right-wing fanatics, the idea of a copycat killing will appeal to them. So the counter-terrorist police are now going to go through every shred of evidence to see if there's any sign of radicalization, any sign of interference from whoever it may be. And I think that is a very good sign, because the bottom line is, whatever this guy's motive, it's terror. And people won't have it in this country, nor should they.
Well, where does this leave the security teams now, the security services, in terms of, as you say, incidents like this prompt other people to carry out incidents? Is there going to be an increased concern about chatter, increased security concerns that we should actually all be a little bit more aware of?
Well, indeed, I think we should. And as you in another interview with you, I already said it's very quick for the cops to say, oh, this person is mentally ill. British cops, but also continental European cops say this. And the independent advisor on counter-terrorist legislation has himself said they're too quick to go to this. Of course, you're bonkers if you want to kill other people, particularly lovely young students who've got their lives ahead of them. You're obviously not normal, but that's not really the point. The point is, how can we identify the sort of people who might be drawn into this violence, and what should we do about it, whether they're mentally ill, whether they're politically motivated or not. And I do think we need to be very careful if we give people the impression that we will do anything other than hunt down anyone who either comes to this country or is in this country who thinks that their grievances legitimate violent attacks on others. There are people who hate Britain. We saw that again in 2017. There are people who have a grudge against the system. But as your security editor was making clear, we now know there was also an attempted attack on a hostel for people. That all suggests, everything suggests to me, this was premeditated. The knives, the black uniform, yes, this was premeditated. And it's answering those questions that the counter-terrorist police, going through the mobile phones, going through all the links, retracing the steps, walking the cat back, as it's called in intelligence terms, walking the cat back, finding out what exactly led to this. Only that, doing that will allow us to prevent similar attacks as far as we are able in the future. And that's not to kind of upset people and make them panic. It's quite the reverse. With good security, people feel safer.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony Glees, good to see you this afternoon. Thanks for your time. And as I say, this suspect is now in police custody, being questioned, not being too cooperative, so we understand, according to Mark White at the moment, but still just a suspect at this stage. Now to politics, because Boris Johnson, and more specifically his honours list, continues to be a headache for the Prime Minister. Sir Keir Starmer claiming that Mr Sunak was too weak to block certain names from that list. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson has urged the Commons Privileges Committee to publish their report on whether he lied to Parliament over Partygate so the world can judge the nonsense. But Boris's own last-minute representations made yesterday may actually be what's stopping us from seeing the committee's findings, which led to his resignation as an MP last week. Let's talk to our deputy political editor, Tom Harwood, who's in Westminster. Oh, what a tangled web this is, Tom. What are we to make of any of it?
Yes, it's an interesting twists and turns in this tale. Of course, Boris Johnson resigned as a Member of Parliament at 8 p.m. on Friday night last week, having seen an interim version of this report. We were expecting it at the start of this week to come out, but as you said, yesterday at the 11th hour, with 5 minutes to midnight, the Prime Minister put forward new representations to the committee, which have now been considered throughout today. There's a question mark in terms of when we're actually going to see this report. There are some reports, unconfirmed at this stage, that the report has now been signed off by the committee and the new representations from Boris Johnson considered. Whether or not that is the case, we will find out in due course. But we could well see this report later on today or tomorrow. And that leaves us with a peculiar situation, perhaps, a choice for the Leader of the House of Commons in terms of when or whether the House of Commons votes on the outcome of this report, given that Boris Johnson is standing down from Parliament. There's an active discussion within government whether the House of Commons vote to accept, is that the word of the motion, accept the recommendations of the report, or acknowledge or note the recommendations of the report. We will have to wait likely before any such vote takes place in the House of Commons.
OK, Tom, for now, thanks very much indeed. Well, this is GB News Live. It's 1:21. Coming up, Suella Braverman was questioned this morning by a parliamentary commission about the illegal migration bill. We'll delve into that very shortly, but first, here's your weather.
Hi there, it's time to take a look at the weather here at GB News from the Met Office. I'm Aidan McGiven. Sunny skies, dry for most of us today, but odd thunderstorm possible towards the northwest of Scotland. Here we've still got weather fronts nearby, and high pressure continues to dominate elsewhere. That high pressure to the north of the UK and easterly airflow, and that means the highest temperatures will once again be towards the west and the south, but temperatures down a degree or so compared with Tuesday. However, wall-to-wall sunshine for the vast majority, barely a cloud in the sky, and as a result temperatures are rising nicely. I think still fairly suppressed along the east coast, average temperatures here, but further west and south, high 20s, possible for 30 Celsius somewhere like central southern England. But as temperatures rise, there's the chance of an isolated thunderstorm for northwest Scotland, particularly over the northwest Highlands. They'll disappear, and then a dry night for most, some patchy low cloud coming into eastern England and some low cloud around the coast of northern Scotland. Otherwise, clear spells and a muggy night. Once again, temperatures staying in the mid-teens by and large. However, any low cloud early morning will disappear very quickly, and then another sunny day for the vast majority. And again, temperatures will rise. We're looking at above average temperatures for most, but once more suppressed along the east coast. Some cloud will bubble up, high 20s the top temperature, but as temperatures rise, some very significant thunderstorms will develop over the Republic of Ireland, and they'll drift north into western parts of Northern Ireland during the evening. Some really lively downpours, frequent lightning and hail, but localised to western parts of Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, we keep the sunny skies for the time being. Then the weather turns much more showery with the chance of thunderstorms for many, especially in the west this weekend.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point, but boom.
And action.
Sergeant Reed, my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1:26 now. Suella Braverman has been questioned by a parliamentary commission about, amongst other things, the illegal migration bill. She was challenged about whether the bill was devised to stop the illegal boat crossings could actually harm efforts to tackle human trafficking. This is what she had to say.
We've got provisions in the IMB which deal with the situation I've just said. We've got to...
So all women who are in those circumstances, they wouldn't be subject to this provision of arrest and detention?
If I can finish the question, because it's a complicated issue, so I do need to get through the explanation. We've set out very targeted and deliberately drafted measures in the illegal migration bill. What we've done is we have allowed for the scenario where someone is claiming to be a victim of trafficking or modern slavery, and if they are part of a police investigation,
but
for example...
Say it's just come to the attention of the authorities, this woman has arrived irregularly or illegally into the United Kingdom and is being used for sex trafficking. And just leave aside...
Yeah, apologies about that. The sound level on that's really low. Oh, well, I couldn't hear it, so if you probably couldn't hear it either. We'll get that sorted out for you and play it a little bit later on. Meanwhile, all of this comes as GB News revealed that just over 9,000 people have now crossed from France to the UK in small dinghies so far this year. 204 people were intercepted by Border Force on 4 small boats yesterday. Let's talk to our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who's here. Afternoon. I was going to say good morning, and that's force of habit. Afternoon, Catherine. I mean, it's interesting that this is such a hot topic, the illegal migration bill. A lot of people, I mean, Barry Gardner talking to you in the last hour saying, well, things need to be done, things need to be overhauled and looked at, and yet this is proving to be increasingly controversial.
Oh, it's very, very controversial. I was reading through some of it earlier, and the very front page, it's 58 pages. It's in the House of Lords for the 5th day. It's in committee stage. They'll be looking through it line by line over about 8 days. And the very front page, there's a note on the European Convention of Human Rights. It says, Lord Murray of Blidworth, blah, 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 has made the following statement. He says, I am unable to make a statement that, in my view, the provisions of the illegal migration bill are compatible with the convention rights, but the government nevertheless wishes the House to proceed. So basically, they can't say that it complies with the ECHR, but they're pressing ahead anyway. So they are sailing very, very close to the wind with this. And the Home Secretary was grilled for 2 hours this morning by the Select Committee for Home Affairs cross-party group of MPs about her whole brief, so police, rape, spiking. But, of course, as you would expect, the focus was very much on illegal migration and many, many questions, not very many answers. As you heard then, one of the concerns is that the modern slavery legislation that was brought in by Theresa May, she was very proud of that. She felt that was a huge achievement of hers. But people have been exploiting that as a loophole, as a way of getting into the country. Now, some people are very worried that genuinely women who are seeking sanctuary will be turned away. So Suella Braverman saying that's not the case. But, you know, she was asked about when are the flights finally going to Rwanda. And, of course, that depends on whether they win their current court battle and getting this through the Lords, etc. So, but until they get people on those flights, people will keep coming in large numbers.
But this is the problem, isn't it? That the government is facing at the moment, whatever they think the idea, whether the idea is good or bad, you've got to get it through the Commons, you've got to get it through the House of Lords, you've got to, and then get it through the courts. Yeah.
Lots and lots of battles and lots of questions as well about the backlog. You know, the government has said they were going to get the backlog down, and Suella Braverman was sort of muddying the waters. Well, there's the legacy backlog and there's this backlog, and, you know, it was... And then also the number of people in hotels. So the government makes a big song and dance about we've got a barge, it's going to hold 500, but we had 600 people come across in one day on Saturday. So they're sort of running, but they just can't keep up. And I thought one of the things that was particularly interesting, I found, was Tim Loughton, who's a backbench Conservative MP, was saying about the French, we're giving 500 million over 3 years to the French, and they're saying, you know, they're intercepting 40% plus of the boats. And he was saying, OK, how many of those people then are they detaining in France and dealing with, or are they just being put back on the beach and they'll come back in a couple of days? And we didn't get any answer on that.
I mean, and this is the problem, because this is going to be an issue that people are going to want to see results on before the next general... If there's any hope for Rishi Sunak, he needs to start delivering on this, doesn't he? And even if he doesn't, the Labour Party's got to put forward some credible plans, hasn't it?
Well, Labour are currently very good at pointing out the many, many problems with it, but they haven't really given any solutions of their own. But as you say, Rishi Sunak has sort of staked everything on stopping the boats now. That's not going to happen, even if they push the election to sort of January 25, if they can get the numbers down significantly. But at the moment, there's not much sign of major progress.
OK. Catherine, for now, thank you. Now, ITV bosses get the third degree from MPs over the Schofield scandal. But did we actually learn anything new? Stay with us for more on that. But first, here's your news update with Tatiana.
Stephen, thank you and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. One person remains in a critical condition following yesterday's attack in Nottingham. School caretaker Ian Coates has now been named as one of 3 people killed. His van then stolen and used to target others. 19-year-olds Barnaby Webber and Grace Kumar were also stabbed to death. A 31-year-old man is still being questioned by police, trying to establish a motive. Well, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, made a short statement in the Commons.
I know that the whole House will join me in expressing our sorrow and that our thoughts and prayers are with the victims' families, friends and all those affected. All of us extend the hand of friendship to the people of Nottingham.
The Home Secretary has also been addressing the UK's migrant crisis. That's as latest figures show the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has now passed 9,000. Questioned by MPs on her plans to tackle illegal migration, Ms Braverman conceded that women who were trafficked into the UK could be deported under the new measures. ITV's boss says both parties involved in the Philip Schofield affair repeatedly denied allegations of a relationship. Chief Executive Dame Carolyn McCall has told MPs action would have been taken had there been any evidence, but there was only hearsay, rumour and speculation. Philip Schofield quit this morning after admitting he had an affair with a younger colleague. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2649 and 1.1702 euros. The price of gold is £1,539 and 35 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,631 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
1:38. Now, the boss of ITV, Dame Carolyn McCall, faced the Culture, Media and Sport Committee today over how she handled the Philip Schofield scandal. Now, she did concede his relationship with a much younger colleague was deeply inappropriate, but insisted there was no cause to investigate because both parties denied the relationship. Let's talk to our national reporter, Theo Gicomba, who's outside Portclose House in Westminster for us this afternoon. What did we learn, Theo?
Good afternoon. Well, it's a story that's garnered a lot of interest over the last couple of weeks, particularly leading up to Philip Schofield's resignation and, of course, after that day where he announced that he was stepping down from his role at ITV. Now, today, Dame Carolyn McCall came with some of her colleagues, including Kyla Mullins, who's the General Counsel and the Company Secretary, and as well as Kevin Ligo, who's Managing Director when it comes to entertainment and media. And they were asked several questions about what's happened over the last few weeks. Caroline Dinenage, who is the chair of the committee, she was straight in there with this question. She said over the last couple of weeks, Piers Morgan, for example, alongside some others, have said everyone knew what was happening, and she said this wasn't the case. There wasn't any concrete, tangible evidence. She said there were many occasions where the company did ask questions to Philip and the colleague who worked at ITV, but both of them categorically denied anything was happening, particularly when it came to the rumours. Kyla Mullins, interestingly though, she did say they were asked on occasion, 12 occasions in fact, about this, and they denied this. So this is something that was going on for a long time. And there's been a slight change in terms of the language, what's been used when it's coming to ITV's investigation on this. Initially, they'd said they were investigating, but now they're saying it's an ongoing review. That's what Dame Caroline said during the Select Committee hearing. We can play a bit of that, of what she said as well this afternoon.
With evidence, we would have been able to launch a formal investigation because the imbalance of power, the imbalance of dynamics in that relationship makes it deeply inappropriate. We worked very, very hard for many, many months, in fact, until recently, to ask people, not just Philip Schofield and Person X, but people in production, if they knew something was going on. And it was repeatedly denied by both individuals.
Interestingly, though, Dame Carolyn McCall also mentioned that Philip Schofield did text her saying that he'd apologised for lying to ITV. And also on top of that, Kyla Mullins spelled out some of the details when it comes to timelines of when these rumours started and when they started looking into this issue. She said in December 2019, an article with commentary about This Morning was seen with a reference to a runner, which came with a lot of speculation and huge interest in the media. And of course, this led to questions being posed to the young man. And of course, this led to duty of care, which she mentioned. And those 12 occasions where he was asked about this relationship, he categorically denied that. And they said they do have logs of when this happened. But what happens now? More questions. They do say an external investigation is taking place. So perhaps more answers will be revealed in the next coming months as well.
OK, Theo, thank you. Now, this is a hard one to take. It's remarkable how time passes, isn't it, sometimes? Because today, believe it or not, marks 6 years since the Grenfell Tower fire, in which 72 people died. Locals are observing the anniversary with the silent walk, and the building will be lit up green overnight. But there is frustration at a lack of change 6 years on from the blaze, and that frustration is turning to some anger. Campaigners say the tragedy has not been the catalyst for societal change that they'd hoped for and, frankly, expected. Well, let's talk to the spokesperson for Justice for Grenfell, Joe Delaney, who joins us now. Joe, good afternoon to you. It's a remarkable anniversary, isn't it, to mark 6 years of this, and know that it's 6 years on from which, as you say, actually not enough has changed.
Nothing has changed, really, has it? There are still 3,000 plus buildings across the country that have dangerous cladding on them. There are still 72 deaths that no one has been punished for. There is still a council around here that is a law unto itself. And there is still a government that is just refusing to do anything about anything unless it involves putting their mates in the House of Lords.
I mean, there has been, to say nothing has happened, there has been some changes, hasn't there, about who will receive assistance to get cladding changed on their own buildings, because it's clearly not enough, though.
It's absolutely not enough. I mean, I think Michael Gove's initiative with the building industry has raised just about $5 billion. The Institute of Actuaries estimate that there's approximately £40 billion worth of work to be done. So, you know, at this rate, maybe by the time we're here talking about the 100th anniversary of Grenfell, we might actually get started on this work. But until then, you know, people are going to be living in dangerous conditions, and people are going to have accidents as a result of living in those dangerous conditions, and people will probably die as a result of those accidents. But, you know, it seems that our government just doesn't care.
Sense of what it is like for people who are not only just around Grenfell, around seeing the tower every day, but those people who are in a condition where they, you know, they can't trust the building that they're living in.
I mean, it really does get on you. Like, you have no idea the pressure that it puts on you to be in that situation constantly. You know, no human being can withstand being under continual pressure and feeling under constant threat. And yet hypervigilance is sort of the norm in this area as a result of this. You know, I see people every day who don't even look at the tower. You will notice that their eyes just sort of avert around it when they're looking in that direction. You know, and that's becomes instinct for people around here. And the people I feel most sorry for are the ones who still live on the Lancaster West estate. I mean, I was lucky to escape there July last year. And to be honest, I felt miles different since I've left. There really has been a substantial improvement in my mental well-being. So I do know the toll it takes on people, and it is continuing to have a toll down there. You know, the residents that were promised the 21st century estate back in 2017 They're still waiting for it, and now they're being told that it probably won't be, finished until 2025, 26, or 27. They still have a 200-foot tomb less than 20 meters from the house. It's an outrageous situation to be in, and the fact that all of this stuff is still so up in the air and undecided, or just frankly unacted upon, where nothing is done at all, is absolutely outrageous.
I mean, do you think it's an interesting point about the tower? You called it a 200-foot tomb. Does it need to come down now? I don't know whether people would want it there as a memorial or whether it needs to be brought down and try to allow people to move on.
My views on this matter differ quite a lot from a lot of people in this communities, because from the moment the fire happened, I said that we should build more housing on that site. I said we could easily fit 2 Grenfell towers. So build a replica and then build another one right next to it. The council clad that building because they felt it looked like the poorer cousin of their shiny new academy. So they were quite willing to risk the lives of all the people who lived in that tower just so that it looked pretty. And what they now want to do is remove the tower completely and give themselves a nice garden in that area instead. If we need a memorial, which I agree that we do, I personally think that memorial should be up at the town hall, right outside the town hall on Horton Street. Because believe me, there is not a damn person in this area who needs to be reminded of that tragedy. But the people up at that town hall, they certainly do need to be. I'd like to see the tower covered in an exoskeleton and vertical gardens put on each side. Because that way as well, come 15 or 20 odd years, when we're at a point where people will probably start digging tumours out of themselves because of the rare cancers they contract, because of the chemicals they were exposed to on the night of that fire, I would like there to be some kind of source around here that we could actually investigate and identify precisely what is causing this, so hopefully it doesn't happen to other people. But it seems that the government want that tower down and, swept out of the way in the way that they want all scandals swept out of the way. Lessons have been learned, but those lessons are never the ones you think they are. The lessons usually are how to get away with the next thing that we're going to screw up, as opposed to how are we not going to screw up again in the future. OK, Joe Delaney from Justice for Grenfell, thanks for your time this afternoon. I'm sure you may well have a view on that. GB Views at gbnews.com. Now, a spokesperson for the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities has said, our thoughts are with the bereaved families, survivors and residents as they remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell Tower tragedy. It's absolutely unacceptable for anyone to have to live in an unsafe building, and residents' safety and well-being should always be the utmost priority. Building owners and developers must act quickly to fix any dangerous defects so residents can finally get on with their lives. We've been clear that those responsible must pay to end the crisis. Nowhere near enough, according to Joe Delaney. Is it? That's just not enough. Not enough is happening 6 years on. Let us know what you think. Now, it's been 8 months since Bill Kirkup's damning report into Kent's baby death scandal, and families are still waiting to see significant changes. The review found that at least 45 babies might have survived with better care at East Kent NHS. Now, the latest CQC report concluded that maternity and midwifery services require improvement. Our national reporter Theo Chikomba has the story.
8 months on since the Kirkup report, families, including Lynn's from Dover, have been waiting to see the response from East Kent hospitals. But have any significant changes been made?
When is this going to be resolved? If the leadership isn't there from the government, then the local government authorities, they just don't know which way to turn. I don't know if it's a lack of funding, I don't know what it is. All I know is that right now, we have got mothers, some of the mothers that I've heard about, they're having their 3rd and 4th babies. These aren't novices. They're scared of going into hospital.
East Kent Hospitals Trust, which is at the centre of the baby death scandal, will be held to account for its ongoing maternity failings, according to a government health minister.
East Kent Hospitals management say lessons have been learned and they're looking to address that for the future. But for the families who featured in the report and others looking to have children at hospitals like William Harvey and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Margate, Have lessons been learned, and is it enough?
During a recent visit meeting here at Christchurch University, Health Minister Maria Caulfield said there's a possibility the government will publish a full response to the Kirkup report before the parliamentary summer recess. Meanwhile, since Lynn's daughter Becky passed away, life has never been the same.
My whole family and all of her friends, we try and remember Becky for the good times and the wonderful girl she is to me. But how can any mother be driven to do that to herself? What does that? How does that happen?
For now, Lynn, alongside other families, are hoping to launch a mother's respite centre so that mothers have a better experience after having children. T.H. Comber, GB News.
Now, the UK economy grew by 0.2% in April. That's according to data from the Office for National Statistics, with the Chancellor saying the UK economy is on the right track.
International Monetary Fund, the international commentators think the British economy is on the right track, that the government is doing the right thing to support the Bank of England. But, like other countries, we have an issue with inflation. It's higher than people expected. And if we want growth, if we want prosperity, if we want to remove that worry that families have about the increase in the weekly shop, the cost of living going up, then...
Well, let's talk to our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, who's on the money. So, Liam, what are we to make of these figures?
This isn't all bad news. I try and bring a ray of sunshine to the programme. Pretty grim news agenda at the moment, blimey. But the UK economy is growing, as we heard from the ONS this morning. The graphic here shows what's happening. Between January and March, the economy expanded just by 0.1% compared to the same three-month period in 2022. And in April, it was up 0.2%. A recession is when the economy is shrinking for 2 successive quarters for 6 months. The UK isn't shrinking, it isn't in recession. The Eurozone at the moment, interestingly, is recession, with the powerhouse Germany suffering from those really high energy prices. And on top of that, more, I wouldn't say good news, but it's better than nothing. The wage data, we had this wage data yesterday, Stephen. We've seen wages go up in March by 6.7% compared to the same month a year before. In April, they were at 7.2%. That's still less than inflation, but that's the highest rate of wage increase in over 20 years. Now, that's good news if you're getting a wage increase. These are averages, but it's really spooked the Bank of England. The Bank of England now talking, warning...
They talk about wage inflation, don't they?
There's this thing in economics called a wage price spiral. That's when wage claims push up firms' costs. Those firms' costs push up prices in the shops, which push up wage claims again, and they spiral upwards. There is now evidence we are in some kind of wage price spiral. And when those wage numbers came out yesterday, Stephen, of course, we were all focused rightly on what was going on in Nottingham. But it's worth saying what happened on bond markets was pretty hairy. Have a look at this graphic here. Now, this shows what are called gilt yields. Bear with me. This is what the government has to pay to borrow. This is how much the government has to pay each year to borrow for 2 years. You see there in September, the gilt yield was up at 4.67%. That was during that mini budget when the Tories, to coin a Labour phrase, crashed the economy. But look at the gilt yield now with those high wage numbers. It's above where it was during the Truss Kwarteng mini budget. Why? Because financial markets are really worried the Bank of England is going to have to push up interest rates even more. About 3 weeks ago, the financial markets were predicting interest rates at the Bank of England, they're currently 4.5%, would peak at around 5.25%. Not anymore. And this is the bad news. Financial markets are now predicting that interest rates could peak at 6%. That has a big knock-on effect to anybody with personal debts on a variable rate, and particularly people who are coming to the end of a fixed-rate mortgage, and there are hundreds of thousands of them each month trying to remortgage. Their payments will go up quite a lot.
So, I mean, just briefly, how does this then work against those economists who make the argument that the level of inflation we're seeing is actually not driven by our normal spending, that raising interest rates won't curtail anything because the spending is going on essentials that we can't curtail.
Right. The Bank of England, it took so long to get going with interest rate rises and to admit that inflation was a problem. It's now, I think, overcompensating, and it has to be seen to raise rates a lot to see that it's serious about reining in inflation. I've got a lot of sympathy with the idea that the Bank of England should actually wait. It's already raised interest rates 12 times in a row. It takes time for these interest rates to feed through. Having said that, if the Bank of England doesn't raise interest rates, the next decision, by the way, is next Thursday, then markets will punish them even more. And that's the problem that we're in. It's a kind of like a game of psychology. But the bottom line is that, yes, the British economy is growing. Yes, that's good. But higher wages mean that there's higher interest rates to come.
OK. Liam, thanks very much indeed. You always bring a bit of sunshine, but a few showers to go with it. That's the trouble. We'll see you in the next hour.
Cheers.
Thank you. Coming up, we'll get the latest from Nottingham, where the third victim of yesterday's attacks has been named as a school caretaker, Ian Coates. We'll bring you more details shortly.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
It's 2 o'clock. This is GB News Live. This is what got coming up for you this hour. Police reveal the suspect in the Nottingham attacks tried to break into a care facility whilst carrying out the attacks, which left 3 dead. Police say they're keeping an open mind as to any possible motive. The third victim of the attack has been named as Ian Coates, who worked at a local school as a caretaker. His head teacher said he always went the extra mile for pupils and colleagues. And ITV's boss has told MPs that Philip Schofield's relationship with a much younger colleague was deeply inappropriate, but says there was never enough evidence to investigate rumours because both parties denied any relationship. And what is going to happen to Donald Trump? We'll be talking to an analyst after he's pleaded not guilty to multiple charges concerning classified documents. More on that this afternoon, but first let's have a look at your headlines with Tatiana.
Stephen, thank you very much and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. CCTV footage from a residential care home showing a man dressed in black trying to enter a bay window is being examined by detectives. It's after the third victim was named as caretaker Ian Coates, whose van was stolen and used to target others in the attacks in Nottingham. Huntingdon Academy described him as beloved and respected and a site manager who always went the extra mile. 19-year-olds Barnaby Webber and Grace Kumar were also stabbed to death. A 31-year-old man is still being questioned by police, trying to establish a motive. Suella Braverman made a short statement in the House of Commons.
I know that the whole House will join me in expressing our sorrow and that our thoughts and prayers are with the victims' families, friends and all those affected. All of us extend the hand of friendship to the people of Nottingham.
The Home Secretary has also been addressing the UK's migrant crisis today. That's as the latest figures show the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has now passed 9,000. Questioned by MPs on her plans to tackle illegal migration, Suella Braverman conceded that women who were trafficked into the UK could be deported under the new measures.
We are not including blanket exclusions in our legislation.
So she would
we have
be arrested.
Struck the right balance whereby genuine victims of modern slavery can still put in a claim, and if they are able to meet the thresholds that we've set in the bill, combined with thresholds that we are implementing at the moment in terms of objective and compelling evidence for their reasonable grounds claim, if they're part of a police investigation, we believe that will filter out the vexatious claims of modern slavery.
Okay.
ITV's boss says both parties involved in the Philip Schofield affair repeatedly denied allegations of a relationship. Chief Executive Dame Carolyn McCall has told MPs action would have been taken had there been any evidence, but there was only hearsay, rumour and speculation. Philip Schofield quit this morning after admitting he had an affair with a younger colleague.
With evidence, we would have been able to launch a formal investigation. Because the imbalance of power, the imbalance of dynamics in that relationship makes it deeply inappropriate. We worked very, very hard for many, many months, in fact, until recently, to ask people, not just Philip Schofield and Person X, but people in production, if they knew something was going on. And it was repeatedly denied by both individuals.
Stronger trade at bars, pubs and shops has helped the economy return to growth. The latest figures show it expanded by 0.2% in April, recovering from a 0.3% fall the previous month. The Office for National Statistics says the positive impact of improved hospital and retail spending was offset by industrial action hitting other sectors. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has welcomed the data, but admits more work needs to be done.
Today's figures confirm what the OECD said last week, the IMF said last month. The Bank of England themselves have said that there is underlying resilience in the British economy, and of course that's positive, but we still have a big issue with inflation. That is the number one challenge we face. We have to do everything we can as a government, as a country, to support the Bank of England in their mission to squeeze inflation out of the system, and that is our primary focus.
Strikes by train drivers will continue for at least another 6 months as union members vote for more industrial action. The ASLEF union said a reballot of its members showed they're in it for the long haul. Unions involved in industrial disputes have to hold a fresh ballot every 6 months to ask their members if they want to continue with their walkouts. ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan says drivers are continuing to ask for a fair deal on pay amid the cost of living crisis. Meanwhile, thousands of NHS appointments and operations are being affected by a junior doctors' strike in England. Union members have walked off the job for 72 hours over an ongoing dispute over pay. The British Medical Association is asking for a full restoration of pay, which it says has seen a 26% cut. They've so far rejected a 5% offer. Health Secretary Steve Barclay says it's fair and reasonable.
I think a 35% pay rise to many of your viewers is seen as something that's out of step with what they themselves would be receiving. So we had talks with the junior doctors. The junior doctors walked away from those discussions, even though we brought in the intermediary that they asked us to do. And we made them an offer, 5% plus a lump sum, in line with what's been offered for paramedics, for midwives, for nurses, for many others with the NHS. And today, unfortunately, the junior doctors have refused to move at all from their demand for 35%.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Stephen.
Tatiana, thank you. Now, police have released more details on the sequence of events which led to the deaths of 3 people in Nottingham in the early hours of yesterday morning. The suspect, alleged suspect at one stage, tried to break into a care facility just after he'd stabbed 2 students to death. A third victim of the attacks has also been named today as Ian Coates, you see on the right of your screen there if you're watching on TV, a school caretaker in his 60s, found fatally stabbed in Magdala Road in the early hours of Tuesday morning. The other victims, Grace Kumar and Barnaby Webber, both of them 19 years old, studying at the University of Nottingham. Of course, Nottingham itself shaken up by all of this. It's not a very big city. It will be deeply affected by this, particularly as it has such a large student population. This is just at the altar of St Peter's Church in St Peter's Square in Nottingham, where people have been paying their respects, laying flowers and lighting candles, and just a steady stream of people. We've been watching these pictures for the last hour or so. People just streaming in, sitting down, wanting to just quietly pay their respects for the tragedy which has happened in the last day or so. And in the last hour, the Home Secretary addressed the House of Commons, confirming that counter-terror police are now assisting the investigation.
I can tell the House that the police are working flat out to establish the full facts and provide support to everyone affected. They are currently keeping an open mind as to the motives behind these attacks, but I can confirm Nottinghamshire police are being assisted in their inquiries by counter-terror police, though this does not mean that it is currently being treated as a terrorist attack.
Let's talk to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who's in Nottingham city centre. Mark, what are we to learn from what the Home Secretary said? I mean, it's interesting that counter-terror police are involved in this, but as she says, we're not to draw any conclusions from that.
Well, given the very significant and complex nature of the attacks that took place, it's not surprising that counter-terror police would be involved in some capacity. They're liaising, they're offering any expert assistance and really trying to determine whether there's any evidence that points to a potential terrorist link. None, as we understand it, have been found yet. It doesn't mean that in the fullness of time they won't find something that points to that. What we understand is that the suspect, 31-year-old West African migrant who is in custody, has not been cooperating with those detectives, so that of course just makes it that bit more difficult. We've been getting a bit more of the timeline of events that took place, we understand that these two young students were attacked, first of all, just after 4 a.m. in the morning, stabbed to death on a street as they were making their way back to their accommodation, their student accommodation. Shortly after that, an assisted living residential complex, the Sealyhurst House, reported that a man had attempted to gain entry into one of the rooms, one of the bedrooms of that facility. Apparently had smashed a window and tried to gain entry. Man dressed in black that the police believe was indeed their prime suspect. That was, though, reported to them later on and not at the time. And then, of course, we know, according to the police, that the prime suspect is alleged to have gone on and then stabbed to death a man in his 50s, Ian Coates, a man in his 60s, I beg your pardon, who was a caretaker at a local school. He then stole that man's white van before coming down here to the city centre and ploughing into 3 people, critically injuring one of those members of the public. I should also say, Stephen, just in the last few minutes, we've had a family statement from the family of 19-year-old Grace O'Malley Kumar. Grace O'Malley Kumar, who was a medical student training to become a doctor. We understand, like her father, who incidentally some 15 years or so ago managed to save the lives of 3 teenagers who were stabbed near his GP practice in East London, so knows firsthand about the devastating consequences of knife crime and knife violence. Well, in this statement, the family of Grace O'Malley Kumar say that she was resilient and wise beyond her years. So happy, they say, with life, fulfilling her ambition of studying to become a doctor while playing top-flight hockey at university. That statement goes on to say Grace was not just a sister to James, but his best friend. He is completely heartbroken. As parents, words cannot express our complete and utter devastation. She will be so dearly missed. That, of course, following the statement, of course, of the other student killed in this stabbing, the family expressing just how devastated they are at the loss of that young man as well. And of course, we await a family statement, I'm sure, in the coming hours from the family of Ian Coates, that caretaker, the 3rd victim to die in this set of attacks.
OK, Mark, thank you very much indeed. And it's just heartbreaking, isn't it? I mean, to hear that Grace O'Malley Kumar was training to be a doctor, her father, a doctor, had assisted people who'd been stabbed 15 years ago, some youngsters who'd been stabbed, then for this to happen to his daughter. And then you saw those pictures of Barnaby Webber, again, just 19 years old, with his family, we think. And again, a bright young man, both of them sports people, a cricketer and a hockey player. There's Barnaby. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. And I think this is where we can all relate, can't we? We all have had children or relatives or nieces and nephews who've been through that age, and it's the prime of life, just when life is beginning, actually, isn't it? Just when that adventure is beginning, especially at university. And especially, you have this happening in a wonderful city like Nottingham, which is a student city. It really is. I went to university there. It is a student city. It's brought alive by the students. Absolute tragedy. And on top of that, not to forget Ian Coates, who has been absolutely praised by the head teacher who he worked for, saying he went out of his way to help students and staff alike. A man who's been absolutely praised today. We're yet to hear from his family. They're just obviously still just trying to come to terms with this horrific situation. Now, let's talk to Major General Chip Chapman, former head of counter-terrorism at the MOD, who joins us now. And it's so hard, Chip, as it always is when things like this happen, to get our heads round what on earth is going on and what on earth would drive someone to do this. Is there a benefit to counter-terrorism officers being involved in the investigation, even if this doesn't fall under a terrorism remit?
Well, I think the reason that they're there and they're working alongside rather than leading, which probably tells you it's not terrorism, is because of the methodology. That is the bladed weapons, marauding bladed weapons, really, and the use of a vehicle as a weapon. So both of those have been fairly recent innovations. But what was unusual about this, which probably doesn't take it into the terrorism sphere, is the time. So attacking at 04 in the morning or around that time, which is not crowded places, which would be the normal methodology were it to be a terrorist attack. You saw that, for example, at Westminster Bridge, London Bridge. So it is a triple murder, which itself is very rare. So that dread hazard, because so many have been killed, often leads to threat inflation. Now, actually, reality is that it is a relatively low volume offence, murder, but 4 in 10 of murders in England and Wales are from bladed weapons. So it's the volume which is unusual here, not the fact that a weapon was used.
I mean, people like you in your former job, in terms of security across the nation, because we know even if this turned out to be a sort of lone wolf attack or whatever, as we tend to call them, it's triggering sometimes to people who think someone else has done something horrific, I can do the same.
Well, that's right. And the entry point, whether you're mentally unstable or stable, is very low. A bladed weapon is instantly available. And also a car, the only entry point for a car is the fact that you need a license to drive it and have a vehicle. So both of those are absolutely available to people at any time. I mean, I would probably argue that certainly in the terrorist sphere, the fact that there are very few of those, and terrorism, of course, has gone down significantly since the heyday of IS around 2015-16, where certainly in European terms it was bombs and bullets, which are the things which were predominant and which kill people, as it did, for example, in the Manchester arena. And I know people don't like saying it, but it is true that mental health does occur also significantly in terrorist attacks, as it does in just criminal attacks. So the independent review of terrorist legislation in 2020 said that poor mental health was often linked to lone actor attacks, as is autism spectrum disorder, which is disproportionately overrepresented in that sphere. And this could be a problem downstream, because we know, for example, that the Met Police will stop attending emergency mental health call-outs from the 31st of August. And a lot of police time is taken up with mental health issues. And partly one of the things that we might be looking at after this is where is the mental health system with care in the community if this is shown to be someone who was pretty unstable. And of course, stable people don't generally maraud and kill multiple people with either a bladed weapon or a vehicle.
Look, I know it's out of your remit a little bit, but can I just ask you about the images that we're seeing, Chip? Because it's St Peter's Church where people have been paying respects, and there's 2 young ladies there in black tops and each with sort of long blonde hair. They're from the University of Nottingham ladies hockey team. That's what's emblazoned on their tops. And they will have known then Grace O'Malley Kumar. So they were talking about 2 young women here who knew one of the victims. It's important, isn't it? And you must have come across this in your time working in this field, how important it is to not only look at the bigger picture, but to realise the impact this has on individuals, and to realise and to take check of the victims of this as real people whose loss will have a huge impact on communities.
That's right. I mean, there's a difference between a sadness and a tragedy. If you die in old age, that's sad. If you die when you're very young, before the flowering of your life, that is an absolute tragedy. And to lose 2 19-year-olds and the 51-year-old, so I don't want to exclude him, when you've got everything to live for and, you're at university, just finished your first year, I mean, that is a tragedy. We want to minimise those tragedies. And that's why it is quite correct that there should be both individual and collective grieving in Nottingham, both from the university community and wider.
Yeah. What do we do moving forward? I mean, you mentioned there's the whole mental health questions. Whether that comes into play or not, we don't know. But we need to be more aware of it as a nation, don't we? I mean, not that this necessarily could have been prevented, but we are told that this suspect was known to police.
Yeah, that's pretty meaningless, though, because he was never convicted of anything. So, for example, anyone who's ever been convicted and released from prison is known to police. So if he was known to police, was it because of the fact that he was drug dealing but they didn't have enough to arrest him? Or was it because that they had to intervene, as they often do, and I said about the police getting involved in mental health issues? So just because he's known to police doesn't really mean much. And the reason I say that is you have to look at the process which we'll be going through now. That is that you investigate, you arrest, the CPS advises on charges. And here, for example, we know we're going to have 3 murder charges and probably 3 attempted murder charges. He's then charged. He issues a plea, there's a trial, and he's sentenced. Again, I think the interesting one will be if he is judged to be mentally an abnormality, which will be his plea of defence. That will be the thing to see when he is actually charged and when he comes to trial.
OK. Chip Chapman, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. And I just find it incredibly difficult when you look at, those 2 young ladies there paying their respects to someone who was very likely a friend in Grace O'Malley Kumar, and you see Barnaby Webber, a 19-year-old, both of them coming to the end of their, presumably was their first year at university. And how many of us are in that position where we have relatives, children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews at university? It's an unspeakable tragedy. And that's not to, in any sense, belittle the tragedy of the family will feel for Ian Coates, that man in his 60s who, as a school caretaker, has been absolutely praised to the hilt by the team he worked for, as someone absolutely dedicated to his job and all the family and friends that he has left behind. More analysis on that coming up, well, not only throughout the course of the day, but for days to come and weeks to come. As and when this comes to trial, of course. But coming up, we're going to bring you the latest on Johnson versus Sunak and what's going on about the report which prompted the former Prime Minister's resignation as an MP.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 2:26. Now let's turn our attention to the NHS and hundreds of thousands of appointments set to be postponed as junior doctors in England begin a 3-day walkout, which health leaders are warning will have an enormous impact on services. Let's talk to our reporter Anna Riley, who's outside the Hull Royal Infirmary for us. And it's two debates here, isn't it, Anna? It's whether the rights and wrongs of people taking the strike action, but also the massive impact on people who are desperately trying to get in for appointments.
Good afternoon, Stephen. Yes, it certainly is. This is now the third wave of strike action from junior doctors. They were last on strike back in April for 4 days, and they were also striking back in March for 3 days. And that combined total of strike action meant 370,000 appointments and operations were cancelled. So you can certainly see a lot of patients will be frustrated about that. But this strike action's happening again because of the British Medical Association. They're the union that represent 46,000 junior doctors who are members of the BMA, and this strike action's happening now because they've rejected the latest pay deal from the government. The government offered them 5%, and they say no, we want 35%. So they've been on picket lines across England, like this one here at Hull Royal Infirmary today, and that's lasting 72 hours to Saturday. Now, in terms of that 35%, they say for the last 15 years they've not had a pay rise that's in line with inflation, and that means that they've lost out on around 26% of their earnings. And if we put that pay rise into context, junior doctors are currently being paid £14 an hour, and they're asking for an extra £5 an hour to take them up to £19 an hour. Now, Stephen McClear, he's a doctor, he was on the picket line earlier today, and he is the co-chair of Yorkshire and Humber BMA. I spoke to him about the strike action, and this is what he had to say.
Once again, it's very disappointing that the government has not taken junior doctors seriously. Doctors go into this profession to care for our patients. We don't want to be out here on the picket lines. We want to be back on our wards, in the departments and in the operating theatres caring for our patients. I'm very sorry that once again patients have had their appointments and their operations postponed as a result of this industrial action. And it is because the government has not given junior doctors a credible offer. They've offered 5%, which doesn't even match inflation this year, let alone address the year after year of pay.
So that's the view from the picket line here in Hull, and in response to this latest strike action, the government have said that they are disappointed with junior doctors going on strike and the impact that this will have on the NHS. They say that they believe that 5% pay offer was fair and reasonable, and they also offered a one-off £1,500 payment to junior doctors. That's been rejected, and this strike action could now well go on into the summer. Junior doctors are saying they're sticking firm by that 35% request, and we know that they're taking rallies around England as well as just coming to picket lines like this one, and tomorrow there'll be a rally in Manchester, and then on Friday a rally in London for junior doctors to get their voices heard.
OK, Anna Riley in Hull, thanks very much indeed. Now to a headache for the Prime Minister. Well, there's lots at the moment, but of course plenty of them involve Boris Johnson, who, of course, you remember last week, resigned as an MP. What prompted him to do that? Well, all this report from the Privileges Committee, but we still haven't seen any detail of it. Why not? Let's talk to our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, who's in Westminster for us. Why haven't we had anything, Tom?
Well, we were expecting this report to be published a little bit earlier this week, but at the last possible minute, new submissions were delivered by the legal team of Boris Johnson to the committee, extra documentation that they needed to go through, although it has to be said that now there are some reports that the committee has signed off this report finally, and there is a bit of a deadline approaching, and that is at 10:30 tomorrow morning when there is business questions in the House of Commons. That's when the Leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, stands up and sets out the parliamentary calendar for next week. Well, we're fully expecting that the Privileges Committee will publish the report before that time, before 10:30 tomorrow morning, in order then that it can fit in the parliamentary business next week for Parliament to vote on its recommendations. Of course, the original recommendation that people were expecting this report to make would have been a suspension from the House of Commons of Boris Johnson for a number of days. If it had been for more than 10 days, that would have created the conditions for a recall petition to have been lodged in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, the constituency of the former Prime Minister. There's some speculation, of course, much speculation perhaps I should say, that the reason why Boris Johnson stood down on Friday night, effective Monday morning, was that he saw this as a kangaroo court that was determined to push for that recall petition and push him out of Parliament, and so he left on his own terms rather than going through the process instigated by this committee. However, the process does go on despite Boris Johnson no longer being a member of Parliament. The process will likely recommend some sort of other sanction of the Prime Minister, perhaps a suspension of the former members' pass that allows former MPs access to the parliamentary estate. Perhaps that is a sanction that may well be proffered by the committee. However, the question is, might the House of Commons, given what has happened, decide to not vote for those recommendations or simply decide to acknowledge those recommendations, perhaps? There is still more to come in this story, more procedure to come in this story. But of course, we're expecting that report to drop tomorrow. And of course, this is not a report into whether or not Boris Johnson broke COVID rules. It's a report into whether he, quote, recklessly misled the House of Commons from the dispatch box. Now, in order to determine that, they'll have had to get inside the mind of Boris Johnson. It will be absolutely fascinating to read how this committee has arrived at their conclusions in terms of determining that Boris Johnson was reckless in misleading the House of Commons.
OK. Tom, for now, thanks very much indeed. Now, still to come for you, Donald Trump pleads not guilty, but can he persuade a jury that he's innocent? We'll tell you more in a moment. First, here's your news update.
Stephen, thank you very much and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. CCTV footage from a residential care home showing a man dressed in black trying to enter a bay window is being examined by detectives. A man matching the description of the Nottingham attacks suspect was denied entry to the Seeleyhurst house at 4 a.m. yesterday morning. It's after the third victim was named a school caretaker, Ian Coates, whose van was stolen and used to target others in the attacks. Huntingdon Academy described him as beloved and respected. 19-year-olds Barnaby Webber and Grace Coomer were also stabbed to death. Grace's family have described her as a truly wonderful and beautiful young lady. A 31-year-old man is still being questioned by police, trying to establish a motive. Suella Braverman made a short statement in the Commons earlier today.
I know that the whole House will join me in expressing our sorrow and that our thoughts and prayers are with the victims' families, friends and all those affected. All of us extend the hand of friendship to the people of Nottingham.
Well, the Home Secretary has also been addressing the UK's migrant crisis. That's as the latest figures show the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has now passed 9,000. Questioned by MPs on her plans to tackle illegal migration, Suella Braverman conceded that women who were trafficked into the UK could be deported under the new measures. And ITV's boss says both parties involved in the Philip Schofield affair repeatedly denied allegations of a relationship. Chief Executive Dame Carolyn McCall has told MPs action would have been taken had there been any evidence, but there was only hearsay, rumour and speculation. Philip Schofield quit this morning after admitting he had an affair with a younger colleague. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick look of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2675 and €1.1699. The price of gold is £1,543 and 71 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,618 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 2:39 now. Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty in a federal court in Miami to 37 federal criminal charges that he unlawfully kept documents relating to national security when he left office and allegedly lied to officials who tried to recover them. Now, the plea from the former president, which was announced by his lawyer, sets up a legal battle likely to play out over the coming months. Of course, as he campaigns to try to win back the presidency in next year's election, with experts predicting it could be a year or more before any trial takes place. Well, let's talk to Molly Jong-Fast, host of the Fast Politics podcast. Molly, good to see you this afternoon. The problem with this is we on this side of the pond sort of try to observe the legal proceedings, if you like. It seems like in the States, people have made their minds up already on this one.
I mean, certainly Trump's base is very attached to him, and they seem to be convinced that this is some kind of deep state plot against their guy. I don't think that there's much truth to that, or in fact, any truth to that, but there's certainly a segment of the American voting population that is just completely on Trump's side, and Trump can do no wrong.
Argument to say, isn't it? I mean, it's difficult, but I mean, this, in some respects, this prosecution absolutely plays into his hands, doesn't it?
You can't let people get away with things because you're worried about how it'll look, right? I mean, the truth is there have been other electeds who have taken documents, right? Like we saw this, Pence did it, Biden did it, but they returned the documents. What happened with Trump was that he refused to return the documents, that he lied to lawyers, that he obstructed, that he committed, or at least the allegations are that he committed 30 counts of the Espionage Act, which is not espionage exactly, but is taking classified documents. I mean, the idea is, should Trump be above the law because he's very popular with the Republican base? I'm not sure that's a particularly compelling argument if you live in a democracy.
I mean, the argument with someone like Biden, the argument was that, the documents were only returned once he was, reminded he had them.
Yeah, but Trump was reminded he had them and decided to just return some of them, right? I mean, that's, Trump could have returned all these documents and likely he would have, been not charged. I mean, that's the thing that's so silly about this, is clearly he has flouted the law again and again. And I mean, look, this is America, right? And I guess they feel that American exceptionalism dictates that we don't charge our former presidents when they do illegal stuff. But, you got, in France, Sarkozy is going to jail. In, you've got in Scotland, you have a leader who just got arrested. In Israel, I mean, you have other countries that are democracies where they hold electeds accountable. I mean, what Trump has done is the minute he saw he was in legal jeopardy, he decided to run again. And since then, he has been indicted once on a state charge and once on a federal charge.
I mean, there is an argument, and you can see it, can't you, from some perspective at least, that this is a bit of a witch hunt. I mean, it does seem, as you say, whether there is a case to be answered or not, there does seem to be an argument that, they're trying everything in their playbook to make sure he can't be president again.
Well, first of all, none of these will happen before he runs for president. And I don't know who they is, but, if you commit crimes, or it looks like you're committing a crime, you're indicted no matter what. I mean, I don't think that if there were a deep state, we would not be in this situation, right? We would not have these cases. You would just have a Trump who can't run. I mean, this is a guy who's been impeached twice. He ran a January 6th insurrection, if you want to call it that. I mean, the guy is not, he is not what we've had as president ever before and likely ever again. So, I don't know. He's gotten away with quite a lot in my mind. And, he's tried to sort of use the presidency to protect him. And maybe it works. Look, a lot of these cases are going to take a year, maybe 2 years. And, if he gets elected, he'll be president and he can dismiss these cases. He can pardon himself. There's all sorts of crazy stuff he can do.
Well, yeah, there is the argument about pardoning himself. What about the argument that he declassified these documents anyway? I mean, he did say at one stage he could declassify documents by just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing, not a real thing. I mean, you can't declassify nuclear secrets. That's Department of Energy, number one. And then on tape, he says, you know, I could have declassified these when I was president, but now I can't. They're very secret. I had thought when I first heard about this tape that he was lying about having the documents because he's kind of a huckster, but he actually did have the documents, which is pretty incredible. So again, you know, look, I mean, the guy has really, you know, the amazing thing about a democracy is we were not set up for someone this craven, and he has really had his way with American democracy in a way that I don't think any of us predicted.
Molly Jong-Fast, really good to talk to you this afternoon. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks.
Now, it is 6 years since the Grenfell Tower fire, which killed 72 people, and people around the UK are still living in homes covered in that flammable cladding. Now, locals, as you would understand, observing the anniversary, they're taking part in a silent walk. The building is going to be lit green overnight, but there is a huge amount of frustration at the lack of change 6 years on. Well, someone affected by this is Alex Dickin, who's now spokesperson for the group called Ipswich Gladiators. Alex, really good to see you this afternoon. I mean, tell us about the Gladiators, what you're trying to do, and what impact it actually has on people knowing they're living in a building clad in the wrong material and nothing seems to be changing.
Yeah, so we're cladded in unsafe material similar to Grenfell, and this is happening all across the country. So it's not just a London issue. We can see it in other cities across England and Wales and in towns like Ipswich as well. And it's so sad and frustrating that we witnessed this Grenfell anniversary, 6 years, where the victims, the survivors, the friends and family have not seen any justice in those 72 months, whilst so many leaseholders and residents are living in unsafe buildings around the country.
I know there's all the arguments that can be had, and you've had many times, no doubt, about what needs to be done, how it can be done, who's to blame. But can I just ask you about the human perspective on this? What does it feel like to be living in a building which, if you own it, has lost all of its value, presumably, at the moment, but otherwise in a building which is just unsafe and no one seems to be helping?
Yeah, so describing it as turning your life upside down doesn't really do it justice. It is extremely stressful. I'm sure all leaseholders have had sleepless nights. We've had to book days off work because it is just too much to deal with. The fact that you're living in an unsafe building where in the event of a fire, are you going to be able to get out safely? What about your belongings in your flat as well? And then on top of that, you have the issues of being actually able to sell your property. Can you remortgage it? So it is an extremely stressful situation. And for me personally, my crisis has gone a step further, where my building of 80 flats has been evacuated. So where I used to live, and I still own a property there, it is now completely empty because the fire risk has been described as intolerable.
I mean, under those circumstances, what do you do? Where do you turn? Who is meant to be helping you out here? Because, I mean, clearly you can't just be left to sort this out yourself. It's beyond anyone's means.
Well, that's exactly why I've had to set up the campaign group Ipswich Gladiators, and many others have in their local area as well, because we've had to fight for every penny in terms of the funding and the legislation and laws that have been put forward so far. But 6 years on after Grenfell, the funding and the laws still aren't good enough to protect and to make every single building that is unsafe into a safe place to live. So it is solely down to the government and to the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, in order to go even further than they already have.
Alex Dickin, appreciate your time today. Thank you. Awful situation. If you're in that situation, it'd be good to hear from you. gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, believe it or not, it's been a good month for the UK economy. It grew in April. That positive news prompting the Chancellor to say things are heading in the right direction. Let's talk to our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, who's on the money. Liam, it's not often we get sort of positive headlines in the economy at the moment. What's going on?
We economists, we're the dismal scientists, aren't we?
You are.
How about a little ray of sunshine? I'll get my feather duster.
So the economy's grown by how much?
OK, so the economy has grown. We got the figures out this morning. So the UK isn't in recession, not by much. You've got to look hard. But the economy in April grew by 0.2% compared to the same month in 2022. That's up from 0.1% during the 3 months before January to March. So no two consecutive quarters of negative growth here in the UK. That is the definition of a recession. We are not in recession, even though the Eurozone, with Germany at its core, their economy is shrinking, not least because they are so exposed, particularly Germany, to those high energy prices given the war in Ukraine. At the same time, another bit of good news, or at least it's good news if you look at it in one direction, that's wages, Stephen. Yesterday, we were focused on Nottingham and the ghastly events there, but we had wage data out from the ONS, and you'll see there, in April, wages rose 7.2% compared to the same month the previous year, up from 6.7% in March.
All right, why is that only good news from one direction?
Here we go. Now, it's less than inflation, but it's still the highest wage rise for 20 years. And that's good if you've got the wage rise. These are average numbers. But it's not good because the Bank of England are looking at that and thinking, crikey, that's a really high increase in wages. The danger is, and there is some evidence of this, that as wages go up, firms have to put their costs up to meet those higher wage bills, which means they then put prices up, which means workers, particularly workers in trade unions, then push for even higher wages. It's called a wage price spiral, and it sends inflation upwards. And we're meant to be getting inflation down. It's absolutely what happened in the 70s, and there's evidence it's happening now. And it's those high wage numbers which are spooking the Bank of England and spooking financial markets, pointing, I'm afraid, and here's where I put my feather duster away, and it gets a bit more grim. All that means that we're likely to see a really big increase soon in interest rates.
All right, none of this would matter as much if inflation is halved by the end of the year. Does it look like we're on track for that?
I still think we are, but the Bank of England's about to come in for some really fierce criticism. The Bank of England is setting interest rates again next Thursday. The next inflation number is next Wednesday. Inflation's 8.7% at the moment. In April. The May number should be a bit lower, but it's not going to be anywhere near the number in the US. They're down at 4%. They have halved inflation. Their inflation was 9.1% last autumn. And the trouble is, inflation here in the UK seems to be stickier than it is elsewhere, than in the US and in the Eurozone. And that is impacting what we call the bond market. The bond market is where the government borrows money to meet all the spending that it hasn't raised tax for. And here's a rather alarming graph. This is what we call the 2-year gilt yield, Stephen. This is the price that the government pays to borrow each year for money for 2 years from insurance companies, pension funds. Now, you'll remember that Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng mini budget back in September when the Tories, quote Labour, crashed the economy and mortgage costs spiked because of the government being accused of unfunded tax cuts. Look at that gilt yield now. It's higher than it was during that Truss-Kwarteng budget. That's because financial markets are worried that we haven't solved inflation. So they're demanding more money from the government, a higher rate of interest, to lend the government money. And that will push up interest rates at the Bank of England as well. And that will push up, I'm afraid, mortgage costs. And that's the bad news that goes alongside the good news I said earlier.
So if they're concerned the government isn't doing enough to tackle inflation, what more can the government do? Because it doesn't look like interest rate rises, which the Bank of England does, is having that much of an impact.
Well, the government, every which way the government turns and the Bank of England turns, it's tough to bring down inflation. It's tough to get the genie back in the bottle, the inflationary toothpaste back in the tube. Once people expect inflation, that means firms put their prices up in anticipation. A lot of firms, frankly, Stephen, if we're honest, they put up in prices even if their own costs haven't gone up that much.
So greedflation.
Because it's kind of an inflationary environment and we all expect it. The government can try and bear down on those public sector wage bills, the wages that the government is responsible for, but it's difficult. This is the third time the doctors have struck this year, today. We've just had news today that ASLEF, the train drivers' union, is going to continue strikes throughout the summer. So it's very, very difficult. All we can hope for is that these interest rate rises from the Bank of England, which a lot of savers will welcome, by the way, if not mortgage holders, we just hope that they bear down on inflationary expectations and finally get these price rises under control.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one, isn't it? It's hard. I'd like the argument with savers versus mortgage.
It's always worth mentioning that because...
Well, it is, but that's the retirement group, because those who've got savings and a mortgage see it all wiped out, don't they?
Absolutely. And also, crikey, the mortgage companies, if you're borrowing money, they instantly put mortgage rates up once the Bank of England puts rates up, but it takes the same banks a lot of time to put the rates up for the savers. Funny that.
Isn't it? Even longer to bring them down again, on the mortgages, that is. Liam, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Well, that is it from me for today. I'm back at 12 noon tomorrow, but up next is Patrick Christie's.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's